I'm here.
Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Ms. Kim. Mr. Kraus.
Here.
Mr. Morrow. Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Here.
Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are duly convened and without objection, Mr. Nate Morrow is excused. As everyone knows, our agenda is incredibly full today, as it always is, and we need to dive in quickly. But I just feel that we cannot allow this time to pass without acknowledging the difficult challenges our state and education partners have been facing due to COVID-19. We did take time during our special called meeting on April the 9th to acknowledge our education partners and the hard work that they had to go through to close schools while still providing essential services to schools, such as meals, distributing instructional materials, and providing online instruction. And that's just to name a few. Now they're going through the process of preparing for the reopening of school, and they are looking to state leaders to support them in the safe return of students and educators to school. So we will be talking about that more in greater detail as we go through Commissioner Schwinn's presentation on the response to COVID-19 by the department. We will have an opportunity to dive more deeply into our questions and what we're thinking about with regard to our role as a state board going forward for the long term and any other rules that we may wish to pass as a result of COVID-19. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Morrison for her opening remarks, and after that, we will turn to Board Member Ferguson for some remarks about one of our educators that we lost earlier this week. Dr. Morrison?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see all of you. We were saying as we were getting started that we're grateful for technology, though we know its limitations, and I'll just open by saying make sure, please, that you're on mute if you're not speaking. That'll help our conversation, and certainly when it comes time for a vote, our members will need to unmute to make sure we can hear you and account for your votes as we move through the items today. It certainly is an unprecedented time for us as a state and as state education leaders. We bear a lot of responsibility for making decisions that are going to be in the best interest of our students and our staff across the state. There are a number of things on the agenda today that are in follow-up from our April meeting, our special called meeting, where we took some important actions to help close out the school year during this health crisis. There are a number of things from that meeting that'll be moving into permanent rule today. You'll hear those items as they come up, and a number of other things related to the COVID-19 health emergency that we've been experiencing across the U.S. There's also a number of items related to charter schools and educator licensure discipline today. So we'll move through all of those items with some discussion, and we'll need to do roll call votes for all items since we are online today for this meeting. And then again, we're excited to hear from Commissioner Schwinn and hear a little bit more about how the department has been responsive and supporting districts over the last few months and how we can work together to think about the supports and the guidance that's needed moving into the fall and this next academic year. So with that, I'll look to our board member, Gordon Ferguson, for a few remarks before we go back to you, Madam Chair, for the agenda.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate just being allowed a few minutes here to share a statement I put together regarding our city school director, Dr. Linda Gilbert. Unfortunately, Dr. Gilbert passed away suddenly a week ago Wednesday from a stroke. She was a young 69-year-old educator and administrator. Linda was also the organist at Bethel United Methodist Church since the age of 15. She was a lifelong resident of Rutherford County and was married to Steve Gilbert, both of them being pillars of their church community. During her career, Linda served as a music teacher at Black Fox Elementary School. She then moved on to being the city school's Associate Director of Instruction, where she co-founded with our hospital, St. Thomas Rutherford Mobile Wellness Unit. The mobile clinic would visit many of our schools and serve the poor and vulnerable in many ways. After some time at MTSU, Linda became the director of the City of Murfreesboro School System in 2010. It was in this role that Linda flourished as a servant leader and became a passionate advocate for children. Many times, Linda would visit me and share her concerns about children living in poverty and not having access to the support they needed. She was especially concerned about those suffering from behavioral health issues. During the span of her career, Linda received numerous awards, including the Tennessee Teacher of the Year in 1998 and later the Tennessee Superintendent of the Year. Linda received the THEC Outstanding Public Service Award and the MTSU Outstanding Leader Award. Dr. Gilbert was the 2019 Athena Leadership Award recipient provided through Rutherford Cable, and there were many other well-deserved awards along the way. I had the privilege of serving with Linda on several boards, including our local United Way board and the Business Education Partnership. Up until last week, Linda was also my wife's boss's boss. In addition to the accolades and her contribution to Tennessee's public education system, Linda will most likely be remembered for her love of teaching, her family, and her church. Linda was a true advocate for the kids and was always pushing her students, faculty, and administrative staff to raise the bar and fulfill their potential. Needless to say, a huge void has been left with Linda's departure, but she has left this earth with a strong foundation for great things to be done. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for letting me acknowledge Dr. Gilbert. I can tell you that our community is still somewhat in shock over the suddenness of her passing, but we are all grateful for the time that we had to spend with her in her different roles.
Mr. Ferguson, I really do appreciate you asking for the opportunity to honor her today. She certainly will be missed beyond measure, and so I'm thankful to you. So this is something we should always do when we lose someone who has made such an incredible mark on education in our state, and of course, particularly for Murfreesboro schools. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Now, moving into our agenda, the first thing, I'm going to give some remarks again about some reminders, but first I'm going to turn to Angie Sanders for a statement of necessity. Ms. Sanders.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. I'm Angie Sanders, the General Counsel for the State Board of Education. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 844-108B3, the State Board submits its determination of necessity for its quarterly board meeting held via teleconference at 9 a.m. on May 29, 2020. Tennessee Code Annotated Section 491301 requires the State Board to meet at least quarterly. Pursuant to the Governor's Executive Orders number 16 and 34, declaring a state of emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and permitting governing bodies to conduct meetings electronically, it has been determined that the State Board's regularly scheduled quarterly meeting should be conducted electronically to ensure the Board can carry out essential business in a safe, transparent way that avoids creating large gatherings of people. Notice of this meeting was posted on the State Board's website along with the agenda and instructions for dialing into the teleconference. With that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. As I said, some usual reminders. All of our votes today are roll call votes, and every member who makes a motion or a second, please state your name for the record. There's a new request of our board members, especially because we're doing this quarterly board meeting this particular way. So members wishing to speak, please address the chairman by stating Madam Chairman, and that way you'll be recognized in order that you may speak, because this is to avoid members speaking over one another. I've witnessed this happen many times. I'm sure that you have too. And so I think it's important to be able to do that today so it's clear who's speaking for the long-term record when we turn back to this and view it if we ever need to in the future. So I just ask that you just simply say Madam Chair, I will recognize you, and then you can begin to speak. Additionally, each presenter, as always, please state your name and title also for the record. Now let's move into the approval of the first item, which is the approval of the consent items. Is there a motion to approve the consent items?
Larry Jensen, so moved.
Mr. Jensen provides the motion. Is there a second?
Bob Eby, second.
Mr. Eby provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell.
Aye. This is Darrell. Aye.
I've got you recorded, Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim. Ms. Kim. Mr. Morrow, Madam Hartgrove, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Motion is agreed to.
Thank you. The motion is approved. Moving into action items on first reading, item 2A, Teacher and Administrator Evaluation Policy. Martha Moore, Ms. Moore.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chairperson. This is Martha Moore. I am the Senior Director of Educator Effectiveness, and we will be discussing changes to the Administrator Evaluation Policy 5201 involving the two alternate observation models that have been proposed by charter schools. Tennessee Code Annotated states that charter schools must meet the same performance standards and requirements adopted by the state board. These charter schools have submitted their proposals as per our rules. Pardon me. As per our rules, they have been reviewed by department specialists, and we are recommending that both models be approved. Thank you for your time and consideration, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Moore? With no questions or is there somebody speaking? Okay. Hearing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve item 2A?
This is Mike Edwards. I make the motion.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Gordon Ferguson, second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow. Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Moore. Moving on to item 2B, Eligible Educator Preparation Providers Permanent Rule. Ms. Amy Owen.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Amy Owen, Director of Policy and Research for the State Board of Education. Currently, the State Board's rule on educator preparation allows local education agencies to apply to become an EPP. Rutherford County was approved to do so last year, and several other LEAs are interested in this opportunity as well. The EPP rule currently states that if the LEA or consortium of LEAs have not received the lowest performance designation on the state's accountability model in either of the two most recent school years, they are eligible to take part in this program. However, due to the COVID-19 public health emergency, there will not be accountability run for the 2019-20 school year. So the language is, we propose to change the language to LEAs are eligible to participate if they did not have the lowest designation on the accountability model in either of the two most recent school years where such performance designations were available. So not just the two most recent years, but the two most recent years where we had scores available. This permanent rule is on first reading. There is an emergency rule on first and final reading that we'll discuss later at this meeting to implement this change right away. However, as emergency rules expire after 180 days, we do need both the emergency and permanent rule in this case, as this would affect any LEAs interested in being an EPP for several years into the future. Thank you.
Are there questions or comments for Ms. Owen?
Madam Chair, Bob Eby.
Mr. Eby? Please
Yes.
proceed.
I understand the importance of this. My concern or question is why would we allow EPPs that have the next to the lowest rating? There's 4 ratings. So why couldn't we look, and I'm not saying for this reading, but for the second reading, let's look and see would it make sense that it would be if they don't have one of the top 2 ratings. Otherwise, I think it could impact the quality of the teachers that we have.
Thank you. We'll be happy to look into that before final reading.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
Bob Eby, so moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
This is Mike Edwards, second.
Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any other discussion? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hill.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim. Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Have 8 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Owen. Moving on to item 2C, School and Student Health Services Rule, Angie Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Angie Sanders, General Counsel for the State Board. I'm presenting to you on first reading the School and Student Health Services Rule. The State Board's tasked with promulgating rules and developing guidelines on numerous issues related to school and student health. The current requirements are spread across multiple rules and policies, including the administration of medication for adrenal insufficiency rule. This first reading item will rename that rule as the School and Student Health Services Rule and will combine all of the related requirements around school and student health services into one central rule. We are also going to hold a rulemaking hearing on this rule on July 28, 2020, and information for those listening from the public on that is posted on our State Board website. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that you all have.
Are there any questions? One thing that I mentioned before in discussion with this particular item in a prep call, I know it's all completely new to us, and COVID-19 and any other type of pandemic or health crisis that may come to us in the future. Have there been discussions among our staff in the department with regard to adding those types of items to, or how we deal with those in the health services area for the future?
Sure, yes, that is something that we have been in discussions with our counterparts at the department. I believe Lori Paisley from the Student Health Center at the department is on the line, and Lori, if you want to speak to anything else regarding that.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Thank you. We are obviously discussing that, and we just got guidance from the CDC recently, and we're using that guidance. And also we have a school nurse coordinator position on my team, and that person oversees health services and works directly with lead nurses and school nurses in the district. Also is a member of the National Association of School Nurses that works closely with CDC on this area. So we are working with them and discussing this at the department.
Very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Excuse me. Are there any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
This is Gordon Ferguson. I move for approval.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
Nick Darnell, second.
Mr. Darnell provides the second. Any other discussion? Mr. James, would you please do the roll call?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
8 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Now moving on to item 2D, Charter School Quality Charter Authorizing Standards Policy. Ms. Allie Gaffey.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Allie Gaffey, and I'm the Deputy Director of Charter Schools for the State Board. The item I'm presenting on first reading is the Quality Charter Authorizing Standards Policy 6.111. And pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated 4913-108, charter school authorizers are required to adopt the policies and practices outlined in the Quality Charter School Authorizing Standards as approved by the State Board. So this policy sets forth the essential practices that shall govern the day-to-day operation of charter authorizers in our state. State Board staff regularly evaluates the standards to ensure they are aligned to national best practices and the needs of our state. And as a result of the State Board's new responsibility of conducting authorizer evaluations, our staff found opportunities to further clarify and align the policy to statute. So changes that are made here reflect technical revisions of the standards. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Hearing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve item 2D?
Bob Eby, so moved.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Darrell Cobbins.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Last call for discussion. Roll call. Mr. James?
Mr. Cobbins?
Aye.
Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Mr. Jensen?
Aye.
Ms. Kim?
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove?
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Gaffey. Moving into item 2E, Charter School Authorizer Evaluation Rule. Ms. Testoval.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Tess Stovall, and I serve as the Director of Charter Schools for the State Board of Education. I'm presenting to you on first reading the State Board's rule that will govern charter school authorizer evaluation. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated 4913-145, the State Board is now charged with conducting periodic evaluations of authorizers to ensure alignment to statute and to quality authorizing standards, which are the policy that the board just reviewed. In the last 9 months, the State Board has engaged in extensive stakeholder engagement leading up to the first reading of this rule and to build out our authorizer evaluation system. We have conducted surveys and focus groups of charter school operators and authorizers. The rule sets forth the broad framework for the evaluation and the accountability system as it relates to the evaluation. Between first and final reading, we will be holding a rulemaking hearing, as well as conducting a pilot evaluation in the fall of authorizers, while we continue to gather feedback from our stakeholders. Therefore, when we bring this rule on final reading, any changes will be driven by that continual feedback process. And at this point, I am happy to take any questions from members.
Are there any questions?
Madam Chair, Bob Eby.
Mr. Eby, please proceed.
Yeah, I'm glad to see an evaluation process, but if I read this correctly, what we're doing is we're evaluating the process of the authorizer. We're not evaluating actually the performance of the school. I was wondering, maybe not for this rulemaking because it may take too long, is that something that we might look at in the future, is including the evaluation of how the school is performing as part of the authorizing process?
Thank you for that question. And absolutely, I think as we get the evaluation system up and running, we're going to be continually thinking about how do we perfect it? How do we, think about other ways to include other aspects in the evaluation system? Certainly, there are other states that do authorizer evaluations that do include a measure that looks at the portfolio of the schools that an authorizer authorizes. as an evaluation component. And certainly that's something that we will continue to evaluate to see if that's something we can bring into our system.
Are there other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 2E?
This is Mike Edwards, so moved.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Gordon Ferguson, second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any other discussion? Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
You have 8 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Stovall. Moving on to item 2F, Strategic Compensation Policy. Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amy Owen, Policy Director at the Board. TCA 493306H requires all school districts to adopt and implement differentiated pay plans that can help in such areas as staffing hard-to-staff subjects and to attract and retain highly qualified teachers. This first reading item is an update to the introductory language of the Strategic Compensation Policy, bringing in general compensation requirements that are currently listed in the Administrative Rules and Regulations. There are no new requirements as part of this change. We are simply ensuring accurate references between the rule and policy as part of our general streamlining and auditing of our rules and policies to ensure that they are easy and clear for districts to use.
Are there questions for Ms. Owen? Hearing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve?
This is Mike Edwards. I make the motion.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Bob
Second.
Eby. Second.
Heard Mr. Eby provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Madam Chairman, you have 8 ayes. You have 7 ayes.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Owen. Moving on to item 2G, repeal of Tennessee Early Intervention Systems Rule. Ms. Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This first read item proposes to repeal the State Board's rules governing the Tennessee Early Intervention System, or TEIS. Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act governs services to children with disabilities birth through age 3 inclusive. Services to these children are currently provided through TEIS. The Tennessee Department of Education has historically been designated by the governor as the lead agency for TEIS and has been responsible for the administration of this system pursuant to state board rules. However, in late 2019, Governor Bill Lee signed an executive order transferring the responsibility for administration of TEIS from the Department of Education to the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or DIDD, as the work better aligns with the current duties of DIDD. This transfer is set to take effect July 1st of this year, and DIDD is currently in the process of promulgating its own rules to govern TEIS, therefore the need for us to repeal our own. I want to thank Dr. Gabrielle Madison, the Assistant Commissioner from DIDD. She has been working closely with us on this, and she's joining our call today in case members have any additional questions regarding that transition.
Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Sanders? Hearing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve item 2G?
Larry Jensen,
Mr. Jensen provides the motion. Is there a second?
Gordon Ferguson, I'll second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Last opportunity for discussion. Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Now moving on to item 2H, Physical Activity Policy. Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Physical Activity Policy was first adopted by the State Board in 2005 and was recently updated in 2017 to include some changes based on legislation. At the November 2019 State Board meeting, our board members and staff and the public heard a workshop presentation on the importance of physical education and exercise to prevent childhood obesity. Based on that presentation, our board members requested some changes to the language of the Physical Activity Policy to more clearly and directly encourage schools and districts to provide regular physical education to students, specifically encouraging physical education at least twice per week. That change is included in this proposal on first reading, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Edwards?
this is Mike Edwards.
Yes, Mr. Edwards.
Amy, do we know how many school districts do two sessions a week?
I don't. That's a great question. We have to dig into scheduling data a little bit, but I'm happy to try to turn that up for you before final reading.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Bob Eby.
Mr. Eby?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to your question either, Mike. I will say this, is that the requirement is that in elementary school, they have 130 minutes a week with at least 15 minutes a day. So if you take that times the 5 days, that's 75 minutes. So that would leave another 55 minutes in there for the districts to have two separate, a 25-minute and a 30-minute, as opposed to 155. In my understanding, talking to the physical education teachers and all, they get much more benefit out of that than just having it in one class.
Thank you for that information. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 2H?
Bob Eby moves for approval.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Jensen.
Mr. Jensen provides the second. Any further discussion? Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
We have 8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Owen. That concludes the items on first reading, and now we're going to move into item 3, action items on final reading. The first one is 3A, Charter School Governing Board Training Policy. Ms. Gaffey.
Hello again, Allie Gaffey, Deputy Director of Charter Schools for the State Board. I'm presenting your first 3 items on final reading this morning, beginning with the Charter School Governing Body Training Policy 6.112. This is a companion policy to our State Board Rule 0520-14-01-.07, which outlines the annual training requirements for governing bodies and was approved at our February meeting. So as of first reading, the policy now contains the list of certified and approved training courses for charter school governing bodies to select from for their annual training requirements. State Board staff collaborated with the Tennessee Charter School proposed courses and established the full list that you have before you. We anticipate that this policy will be updated annually as new courses are proposed and certified for State Board approval. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 3A?
This is Mike Edwards. I make a motion.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Bob Eby, second.
Mr. Eby provides a second. Any discussion? Mr. James, please conduct the roll call.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Ms. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ally. Moving on to charter school rule. That's your next item. You have B and C. I know you just said that.
Yes. The second item I'm presenting on final reading is our Charter Schools Rule 0520-14-01. And our changes since first reading include additional updates to the language about application deadlines in alignment with statute and a reorganization of this rule to clearly differentiate between responsibilities of all authorizers from responsibilities of local boards of education as authorizers. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
Ms. Gordon Ferguson, I'll move for approval.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
Bob Eby, second.
Mr. Eby provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Ally, item 3C, charter school waiver request rule.
This third item I'm presenting on final reading is our Charter Schools Waiver Request Rule 0520-14-02. There have been no changes to this item since first reading, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 3C?
So moved, Darrell.
Mr. Cobbins provides the motion. Is there a second?
This is Mike Edwards. I second.
Mr. Edwards provides the second. Last call for discussion. Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Ms. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim, Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Gaffey. Now moving on to item 3D, Educator Licensure Policy. Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Educator Licensure Policy has revisions up on final reading that align with changes to the Educator Licensure Rule that this board approved at our April called meeting. There were several changes since first reading to continue to eliminate redundancies between rule and policy, to clarify endorsement flexibilities, and to identify and to continue to identify allowable options for educators to earn professional development points. This policy also creates 2 new license types for integrated early childhood education. Integrated here meaning when students with and without disabilities are educated in the same classroom. Particularly in the early childhood years, this kind of inclusion model is very common. You may also have students who are having difficulties that have not been identified as a disability yet, simply because they're very new to the education system. So educators trained in this pathway would then be able to support all students, regardless of whether or not they have an identified disability. I'm very excited about that. I have a brother with a disability. He was in just that kind of classroom many years ago, and I think it's a great step forward. The next step will be for the Department of Education to bring in July standards for ed prep programs that want to offer that endorsement, and the licensure assessments individuals would need to take to obtain them. With that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions or comments? That is a welcome change. Thank you for this presentation. Does anyone else have any questions? I saw Mike Edwards just pop up.
No, I'm just muting myself in anticipation of the vote.
I was going to say, I know you're getting ready. So no questions, no comments. So let's move for a motion to approve. Is there a motion to approve?
So move.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second?
Gordon Ferguson, second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any other? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Moving on to item 3E, Employment Standards Rule. Ms. Owen, you're up again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pursuant to TCA 491302, the State Board has authority to adopt policies regarding all of the qualifications, requirements, and standards for individuals to obtain licenses and certificates to teach. Employment standards are a way for licensed educators to add additional courses that they may teach. For example, the Algebra 1 Employment Standards allows educators licensed in middle school math to also teach Algebra 1, which is very helpful as some of our districts offer 8th grade Algebra 1 or Integrated Math 1. That's just one example. Currently, the employment standards are housed in our administrative rules and regulations. As part of our efforts of rule reorganization and clarification, we propose to pull them out into a standalone rule in our section of rules on educator licensure. Since first reading, we have made one change that one of our members requested at the February meeting to remove a fairly old allowance that schools with fewer than 225 students, their principal would not have to meet licensure requirements. And as I said, our board members directed us to remove that at the February meeting, and we have done so. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
Bob Eby moves to approve.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Mike Edwards, I second.
Mr. Edwards provides the second. Last call for discussion. Mr. James, please conduct the roll call.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Owen. Moving on to 3F, Career and Technical Education Personal Finance Standards. Mr. Steve Plale. Sorry, I always
Good morning.
your last name. I apologize for that.
No worries, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to present. My name is Steve Plale, Senior Director of College and Career Experiences for the Tennessee Department of Education. Good morning, board members. Excited to present on final reading the Personal Finance Standards. This was originally presented to the board in November 2019 on first reading, and after some further conversation with our stakeholders and advisory committees, councils made minor revisions to what was submitted for first reading, and now pleased to present it on the second reading here.
Are there any questions for Mr. Plale? I'm going to call you by your first name.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
Ms. Gordon Ferguson, move for approval.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
Larry Jensen, second.
Mr. Jensen provides the second. Last call for discussion. Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Mr. Steve.
Thank you very much, Madam
I
Chairman.
didn't butcher your last name, which it should be easy to pronounce. Thank you.
Yes,
Item-
ma'am. Thank you.
Item 3G, District and School Operations Rule. Ms. Amy Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next 2 items are a bit of a set. We have 2 rules, the administrative rules and requirements and the minimum requirements for the approval of public schools, each of which house a number of requirements that our districts and schools are required to meet. However, it was not always obvious to school districts or frankly to staff what made something an administrative rule versus a minimum requirement. So to clarify this and to create a little bit more order to our rules moving forward, we propose to rename the administrative rules and regulations into the District and School Operations Rule, which is our first item I'm talking about here. This includes logistical and operational requirements for all of our schools and districts. There is not much new information, particularly since first reading. It's primarily clarifying existing language, some of which was a little bit older, and moving in requirements from other rules or policies. This also helps us comply with Public Chapter 929 of 2018, which stated that anything that affects the rights or privileges of third parties needed to be in rule rather than in policy. So I'm happy to take any specific questions that you all have. And then, as I mentioned, the next item is really the complement to this one as well.
Are there any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
This is Mike Edwards. I'll make the motion.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Darrell.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Last call for discussion. Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Moving to item 3H, Academics and Instructional Requirements Rule.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned, this proposes to rename the minimum requirements for the approval of public schools into the Academic and Instructional Requirements Rule. So where the rule that you just voted on is more about operations and logistics, this rule is now specific to academic and instructional programming. There were a few changes between first and final reading reflected on the cover sheet of the item, primarily to move language from policy into rule. I would also like to thank several stakeholder groups that were involved in helping us with this pretty massive overhaul and reorganization of the 2 rules. The Organization of School Superintendents, as well as the School Board Association, answered questions that we had as we sought to make sure we didn't accidentally break anything as we were reorganizing these rules. We also consulted with the Attorney General's office in several places, and the DOE Office of School Approval was a key partner as well. So thank you to all who helped us with this process.
Excellent. Questions or comments?
Madam Chair, Bob Eby.
Mr. Eby.
Yeah, on .05 on the rule, public virtual schools, I didn't see anything that needed changing at this point in time, but certainly with the COVID situation, I think that's something that we will be looking at in a lot more detail over the next several months. Comment.
That's absolutely right. We actually have a small working group with several colleagues at the Department of Education to look at the virtual schools rule right now. Also how it aligns with things like course access programming. We have a distance and e-learning policy that needs updating. So you're absolutely correct, and you can expect to see that in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 3H?
Bob Eby moves to approve.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Nick Darnell, second.
Mr. Darnell provides the second. Any other discussion? Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
The ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Owen. Great work. Moving on to item 3I, licensure denial, former reprimand, suspension, and revocation policy. Ms. Brittany Kendrick.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. I am Brittany Kendrick, the Assistant General Counsel for Educator Discipline. This morning, I'm bringing to you the license denial, former reprimand, suspension, and revocation policy, 5.501. It is a companion policy to the Educator Licensure Discipline Rule that the board passed at its November 2019 meeting. The major changes since the first reading are mainly around the due process rights related to those individuals whose license has expired during the period of revocation. And then there's an additional change around settlement agreements pursuant to board policy personnel policy 1.300. And with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Questions or comments, Ms. Kendrick? Is there a motion to approve?
This is Mike Edwards. I make the motion.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Darrell.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Last chance for discussion. Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
The ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Moving on to item 3J, license reinstatement and license restoration policy. You're up again, Ms. Kendrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Madam Chair, members, Brittany Kendrick, the Assistant General Counsel for Educator Discipline for the board. Before you is a license reinstatement and license restoration policy. Again, this is a companion policy to the licensure discipline rule that the board passed in November 2019 at that meeting. This policy hasn't been updated since 2015, and obviously there have been a lot of changes that have taken place with respect to discipline since then. So those changes are coming forward. Since first reading, the biggest change that we've made in the policy is, again, addressing the due process rights for those educators whose license expired during the period of revocation. And we've also created a restoration application to be attached to that policy so that when individuals want to apply for restoration of their license, we can have a more formal process of that. And with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 3J?
Larry Jensen, move to approve.
Mr. Jensen provides the motion. Is there a second?
Gordon Ferguson, second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any comments, questions? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins,
Aye.
Mr. Darnell,
Aye.
Mr. Eby,
Aye.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen,
Aye.
Ms. Kim,
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
The ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Kendrick. Now moving into item 3K, eligible educator preparation providers emergency rule. Ms. Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned with the eligible EPP rule on first reading, we do also need an emergency reading version of this rule for the next 180 days in case any LEAs that are in the process of applying to become an EPP do not have accountability data from the 2019-20 school year due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. This language is just the same as what you voted on first reading. It simply takes effect more quickly because it is an emergency rule. Thank you.
Questions or comments for Ms. Owen? Is there a motion to approve? Item 3K.
So moved. Darrell.
Mr. Cobbins revised the motion. Is there a second?
Ms. Gordon, I'll second.
Mr. Ferguson provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman, please roll.
Aye.
It ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Owen. Item 3L, Charter School LEA Policies, Mr. Nate Parker.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the board. My name is Nate Parker, and I'm the Coordinator of Policy and Federal Programs with the State Board. And today we'll present the Charter School LEA policy revisions for first and final reading. As a reminder, the State Board adopts policies to govern its functions as the LEA for authorized charter schools. These policies will only impact the charter schools authorized by the State Board and will not be applicable to any other school or local district. The updates were part of our regular annual review. The State Board staff annually reviews the LEA policies for updates based on State Board rule and policy changes, statutory changes, and best practice updates. Today, I have a total of 11 policies with significant revisions to present for your approval. I will provide a high-level overview for what edits have been made to each of the policies first, and then I will open it up for any questions that you may have. Policy 1800, school calendar. The revisions reduced the number of required days for teacher-parent conferences from 2 days to 1 day, and also clarify that it's the district's responsibility to submit a waiver to the Department of Education for the 180-day classroom requirement. Next is Policy 1801, Special Education and Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA. The revision added a provision for schools to establish a process to recruit, train, and appoint surrogate parents in cases where a student with a disability requires one. Next is Policy 4206, Homebound Instruction. The revision here clarified the procedure for marking a student as homebound according to guidance from the Tennessee Department of Education. Next is Policy 4210, Credit Recovery. Here, the revision added a provision regarding what requirements students may be required to complete as part of a credit recovery program. Next is Policy 4603, Promotion, Retention, Grading, and Assessment. Here, the revision added language to clarify who should provide input for individualized promotion plans and clarified how schools should notify the State Board of the percentage for which the state assessment shall count towards a student final grade. Next is Policy 4701, Test Security. The revisions clarified language, training responsibilities of districts and district and building testing coordinators. Policy 5106, Application and Employment. Here, the revision added language requiring the State of Tennessee form to report employee misconduct and clarified how to submit that form to the State Board. Policy 6206, School Admissions and Enrollment Period. The revision removed unnecessary language duplicated in enrollment procedures. Next is Policy 6413, Concussion and Sudden Cardiac Arrest. The revision here updated the concussion language to include athletic director and all coaches as responsible for completing the online course. Policy 6503, regarding homeless students. The revision clarified the role of authorized charter schools in keeping up-to-date contact information for families experiencing homelessness. And finally, Policy 6504, migrant students. Here, the revision clarified language for school-based procedures to include using the occupational survey to identify potential migrant students. Thank you. As you let me review each of those for you, I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Are there any questions for Mr. Parker? Hearing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve item 3L?
Ms. Gordon Ferguson, I'll move for approval.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Darrell.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Guys, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Mr. Parker, thank you so much for your due diligence and your swift introduction of each of those changes to the board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're moving on to item 3M, Individualized Education Accounts Emergency Rule. Ms. Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm bringing to you all on first and final reading an emergency rule regarding spending requirements for the 2019-20 contract year for account holders participating in the Individualized Education Account, or IEA, program. These rules are pursuant to emergency rulemaking authority that was granted to the board in response to COVID-19 via Public Chapter 652. Currently, our IEA rules state that account holders must spend 50% of their funds by the deadline for submission of the last expense report for the contract year. If they don't do that, the difference in that amount will be subtracted from their account in the next contract year if they renew their IEA. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, many students in this program were unable to meet with their educational therapists, such as occupational or speech therapists in person. For a variety of reasons, a lot of these therapies can't be provided remotely. Therefore, many account holders were not able to spend down their IEA funds. This change will allow these account holders who renew their IEA for the 2020-21 contract year to maintain any unused funds from this year to be able to access and pay for educational therapies that they missed during this COVID-19 crisis. And with that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Sanders? Is there a motion to approve item 3M?
Larry Jensen, move for approval.
Mr. Jensen provides a motion. Is there a second?
Bob Eby seconds.
Mr. Eby provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
Ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Now moving into item N, 3N, COVID-19 waivers, Ms. Christy Ballard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. The item you have before you on final reading is a list of COVID-19 waivers requested by LEAs. Now, to give you a bit of background, as most of us know, Chapter 652 of the Public Acts of 2020 granted the Commissioner of Education the authority, upon the approval of the State Board, to waive state statutes and/or State Board rules that inhibit or hinder an LEA's ability to meet the LEA's goals or comply with the LEA's mission due solely to the outbreak of COVID-19 that occurred during the spring semester of the 1920 school year. So State Board of Education emergency rule requires that all waiver requests be submitted to the Commissioner by June 30th of 2020. So in response to this action by the General Assembly, the Office of General Counsel at the Department, we worked very closely with the State Board to create an application for LEAs to request waivers related to COVID-19. So based on feedback from LEAs before the release of the waiver application, we worked with the State Board staff to identify three of the most common areas of statute and rule from which districts would likely request waivers. Those three pre-filled waiver requests on the application are a waiver of 49-5-409B, which requires school districts to notify teachers within 5 business days following the last instructional day for the school year if a teacher's contract will not be renewed for the succeeding school year. So upon receiving that waiver, in lieu of complying with that requirement, school districts would, at a minimum, provide notice to those teachers by June 15th. The second waiver would be of TCA 49-5-503, subsection 4, which states that teachers who have received evaluations demonstrating an overall performance effectiveness level of above expectations or significantly above expectations as provided in the evaluation guidelines adopted by the State Board of Education pursuant to TCA 49-1-302 during the last 2 years of the probationary period are eligible for tenure. And because there were no LOEs or overall evaluation scores for teachers this year due to the school closings because of COVID-19, school districts that received this waiver in lieu of taking this action could deem teachers eligible for tenure if they had previous LOE scores during that 5-year probationary period. It allows them to reach back maybe to years 3 and 4 to be deemed eligible for tenure. And the third is a waiver of TCA 49-202A6 and State Board Rule 0520-1-2-.11, requiring every member of a local Board of Education to participate in annual training. There are a lot of trainings that had to be canceled. TSBA holds most of those trainings, and while they do have some virtual online training modules, there are a few school board members who do not have access to the requisite equipment and technology to be able to participate in those virtual trainings. So this waiver is there for any school board members who don't have the ability to complete their annual training remotely. So the waiver application contains boxes for LEAs to check to request a waiver from one or more of these 3 identified areas. The department has made the decision to waive these requirements for each LEA that requests a waiver, and this proposal seeks State Board approval for the Commissioner to waive these requirements. A list of LEAs and which of the 3 waivers each has requested is included in the spreadsheet with this item. So the waiver application, you will note, also contains an open-ended section for LEAs to request waivers from other rules or statutes. The department is considering these additional waivers on a case-by-case basis and will propose the additional waivers recommended by the Commissioner for approval to the State Board at a later date. So with that, I'm very happy to answer any questions you have.
Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Ballard? Hearing no questions or comments, is there a motion to approve item 3N?
This is Nick Darnell. So move.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second?
Bob Eby, second.
Mr. Eby provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow. Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
7 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Ballard. I appreciate your work on this, and during this particular time, we know that normally we would not want to have waivers, or we would want to have very few, but under the circumstances and in the situations that you described, they certainly make sense. So thank you for the work on that. And moving into item 3O, Special Education Emergency Rule. Ms. Sanders, you're up next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, these are emergency rules on first and final reading pursuant to the board's emergency rulemaking authority in Public Chapter 652. Current state board rules governing special education state that initial eligibility for the disability category of developmental delay shall be determined before the child's 7th birthday. Because of the COVID-19 crisis and natural disasters due to tornadoes in Middle Tennessee, some students began their initial evaluation for developmental delay prior to their 7th birthday, but then during these unforeseen periods of school closure turned 7. As a result, their evaluation wasn't able to be completed prior to the 7th birthday. And we want to make sure that these students who might otherwise have been able to have been found eligible for developmental delay can continue to do so. So these rules just make that clarification to allow these students to be considered eligible for this disability category. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Sanders? Is there a motion to approve?
Ms. Gordon, move for approval.
Mr. Ferguson provides the motion. Is there a second?
This is Mike Edwards, I second.
Mr. Edwards provides the second. Any discussion? Mr. James, would you call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
7 ayes, Madam Chairman.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Now moving into item 3P, Course Access Program Provider Approval. Mr. Hank Staggs.
Yes, hi, good morning, Madam Chair and members. I am Hank Staggs, Director of Instruction, Technology, and Support for the Standards and Materials Division at the Department. This item that I'm bringing before you regards the Course Access Program Provider Approval on first and final reading. Course Access falls within the Course Access Act, which is codified in TCA Title 49, Chapter 18. And just recently, the board developed rules governing the Course Access Program, Chapter 0520-01-14, and these rules became effective on December the 29th, 2019. So within that, the department received 3 provider applications. As outlined in the rule, the department reviewed these applications and were received from Florida Virtual School, Polk County Innovative Learning Academy, Memphis Virtual School. The applications were reviewed by the department divisions, including academics, CTE, data governance, teacher licensure, and finance, in order to ensure that the applicants met the requirements as outlined in the rule. Upon review, these 3 applicants are recommended for approval as course access providers, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Staggs?
Madam Chair, Bob Eby.
Mr. Eby?
Yes, I just have a basic question. Do we expect a significant increase in these applications as a result of the COVID or not?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We're not sure about that. Certainly, we've gotten a lot of attention and interest in virtual learning, distance learning, and course access. And as districts seek to partner with each other and give access to their students across the state, then yes, we would anticipate that there would naturally be an increase.
Thank you. I do like the approval process that you have. I think it's very good.
Oh, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
Bob Eby moves for approval.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Larry Jensen, second.
Mr. Jensen provides the second. Any other comments or questions? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Morrow, Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Mr. Staggs. Appreciate your work on that. Moving on to item 3Q, Local Education Agency Alternative Salary Schedule. I believe it's Ms. Martha Moore that's going to present this item.
Good morning. I'm Martha Moore, Senior Director of Educator Effectiveness. State Board Strategic Compensation Policy 5.600 permits LEAs to meet the requirements of differentiated pay through an alternative salary schedule that is approved by the State Board. While districts are required to submit alternative salary schedules every 3 years, if there is a substantive change during that 3-year cycle, they are required to bring it in front of the State Board to determine if those are acceptable changes. We currently have 2 districts, Chester County and Kingsport City, that have proposed such changes to their alternative salary schedule. Specifically, these districts have chosen to move away from performance-based pay increases. They are not compensating advanced degrees in the same way that the standard salary schedule does. And that move requires that the State Board approve the change. We have some accompanying attachments to explain the specific changes to their salary schedules, but we do recommend approval. At this point, I would like to thank you for your time and consideration, and please let me know what questions you might have.
Questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 3Q?
This is Nick Darnell. So moved.
Mr. Darnell provides the motion. Is there a second?
Kent Darrow.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Questions or comments? Mr. James, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Tomorrow, Madam Chairman Hargrove.
Aye.
8 ayes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Moore, for presenting that item. Item 3R, Minimum Salary Schedule 2021 school year, Mr. Jack Powers.
Madam Chair, I think I am actually presenting on this item. My name is Charlie Buffalino. I'm the Assistant Commissioner of Policy and Legislative Affairs. If I can proceed to present.
Yes, you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pursuant to state law, the Commissioner of Education and the Department are required to annually present and submit to the State Board of Education for approval a state salary schedule for licensed personnel, and that must include a base minimum salary for personnel with a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience. We are proposing that the current state minimum salary schedule remain unchanged with a base salary schedule of $36,000, and that proposal would be for the upcoming 2020-21 school year. I do want to provide a little bit of context on this item for the board. However, as I think all of us recall, as part of the governor's State of the State, he announced his intention to move the state very aggressively in regards to teacher pay. And part of that included a plan to, over the course of 2 years, raise that base salary to $40,000, which would have included in that initial plan a proposal to raise it to $38,000 for this upcoming school year. Due to the COVID-related pandemic and the uncertainties that has put many of our local districts in from an economic standpoint, the decision was made to pause on that currently. In our initial analysis and estimates, proceeding would have affected 89 school districts statewide, and we knew that they would be in a pinch to proceed with that. However, the governor's office has asked that I reiterate their commitment to moving as aggressively as possible in raising that minimum salary schedule. They are already discussing plans and the timing for how they'll be able to do so. But for purposes of this item today, the department is recommending for approval that minimum salary schedule remain the same for the upcoming school year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions or comments?
Madam Chair,
Edwards.
I want to say that, one, I think what the governor has been doing is absolutely commendable. It is exactly what teachers in Tennessee have needed. That said, I also think that the governor and the state has no choice, and this is a necessity. You can't give money that isn't in the coffers. I think it's great that the governor's going to come back with aggressive response later as he can. Truth of the matter is, I hate it. I don't know of an alternative of what you're requesting.
I don't know that there would be anyone that would disagree with what you said, Mr. Edwards. We would certainly wish that the opportunity would be there in the budget to move forward with raising that minimum salary schedule. We certainly understand in the times that we're living in now, it's just not an option. But thank you for making that comment.
Madam,
yes.
Madam Chair, if I may respond, I would like to point out that there is currently, as part of the budget that the legislature passed in March that they are now revisiting again, that budget did include a 2% increase in the instructional salary component of the BEP, scaled down from initial proposal of 4%. And so we are sort of hopeful that that increase will remain, but sort of independent of the increase in the salary schedule. So the governor has continued to try to do whatever possible for teacher salaries, even amongst these challenging times.
Thank you for clarifying and reminding us of that. And of course, I think we hope that it will continue that way and it would not be eliminated when the budget is finally approved.
Yes, ma'am.
Or the cuts were made. So thank you for saying that. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
This is Mike Edwards. I'll make the motion.
Mr. Edwards provides
Second.
Mr. Edwards provides the motion and Mr. Jensen provides the second. Any further questions or comments? Mr. James, would you please conduct the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow. Madam Chairman Hartgrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it and the motion is approved. Thank you for presenting that item. And I'm glad we had the discussion that we had today. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. Before we move into the next agenda item, I do want to let the board members know that we will take a break after item 4, teacher licensure actions. And then when we come back before the presentation by Commissioner Schwinn, I want to remind you that we've asked you all to say 1 or 2 sentences where you would provide advice to the class of 2020. So just want to give you that reminder. But let's move into item 4, teacher licensure actions. Ms. Kendrick.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members. Again, I'm Brittany Kendrick, the Assistant General Counsel for Educator Discipline for the board. Before you are the Educator License Discipline recommendations from the staff regarding misconduct. I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have about the materials or the recommendation at this time.
Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Kendrick?
Madam Chair, Bob Eby.
Mr. Eby.
I would just like to thank Ms. Kendrick and her team, because I think one thing they're doing now is really giving us the background information, showing the consistency and the reasoning from which the recommendation is made, and that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eby. And again, to all of the members, if there is any additional feedback you can offer us to help you all better make these decisions or information we can give, please let us know. We'll try to accommodate that.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Eby. Perfect. She needed to hear that, and I echo your comments and your sentiments. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve item 4, which includes 4A and B?
Bob Eby moves for approval.
Mr. Eby provides the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Darrell.
Mr. Cobbins provides the second. Any further questions or discussion? Mr. James, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins.
Aye.
Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Ms. Kim.
Aye.
Mr. Mr. Morrow, Madam Chairman Hargrove.
Aye.
8 ayes, Madam Chair.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. I was planning on a 5-minute break, so let's just plan to come back at 10:35, just to even out the time. 10:35, we will reconvene, and we'll begin with hearing from each of the board members their best advice for the class of 2020, and then we'll turn it over to Commissioner Schwinn. Thank you all. It is 10:35, and we will reconvene if we have everybody here. You know, this is usually a challenge when we're all together and people are talking with one another. So do we have everybody?
You got me.
Do a roll call.
Mr. EB, Mr. Jensen, and we might need that just to make sure we've all returned.
Standing by.
Wouldn't hurt to do that. Why don't you do that, Nathan, just to make sure everybody's here?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Cobbins.
Here.
Mr. Darnell.
Here.
Mr. Eby.
Here.
Mr. Edwards.
Here.
Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Ms. Kim.
Here.
Mr. Morrow. Mr. Kraus. Mr. Kraus. All are here except for Mr. Morrow, who's excused.
Thank you, Nathan. As promised, let's move into going around, and I'm going to call your name and ask you to provide your 1 to 2 sentences of advice to the class of 2020, and we'll start with Mr. Eby.
Congratulations to the class of 2020. Yours will be a class that is forever remembered as being in the forefront of the time of change to a new normal. But don't be satisfied with just normal, whatever that may be. Know that change brings opportunity, and use your educational accomplishments during this unique time and take this opportunity to make a positive difference in our changing world. Congratulations.
Thank you. Moving over to Mr. Edwards.
Well, congratulations. You all have accomplished something very extraordinary, and we are all excited for you. I would encourage that you, when you think about your step into your next step out of high school, whether it be into work or higher ed or job training or the military, to think not just about your immediate entry, but what you see for 5, 10 years and beyond. And think about the preparation you're going to need throughout that time to get through. Also, this is a very extraordinary time, and we and you have seen better than ever what this society needs in going forward to hold us together. I would encourage, we all need role models, and we need your role model. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Moving on to Mr. Cobbins.
Yes, ma'am. It was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said that the ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand during times of comfort and convenience, but rather where they stand during times of challenge and controversy. And I would like to encourage the class of 2020 to focus on the future, know that this too shall pass, this time that we find ourselves in, and that the world needs their skills, their talent, their passion, and their belief in that future, that they have the hands that will shape and mold from this point forward. So Godspeed to you, and take the world by the horns.
Thank you. Mr. Darnell.
4 years ago, I was blessed with the opportunity to be able to teach around 100 members of the class of 2020. And if the entire class is anything like those 100 individual students, they are going to be a phenomenal success in our world. As I came in this morning, I saw a quote laying on my desk, and I feel like it's meant for the members of that class. And it's from Steve Maraboli, and he says, "Never confuse someone else's inability to do something with its inability to be done." So I wish the class of 2020 a great success, and we look to you to go into the world and solve those problems and situations that no one else has been able to tackle yet.
Thank you. Mr. Ferguson.
Congratulations to the class of 2020. I know these are very unusual times, but I would encourage you to be true to yourself and don't be afraid to aggressively pursue both your professional and your personal ambitions. Be sure to do what is right and take responsibilities for your own actions. I know you'll do very well. Wish you the very best.
Thank you. Mr. Jensen.
I would encourage you to pursue your passion and dreams, to pursue a path of excellence in all that you do, and find and engage a mentor who can be a friend and encouragement to you on a personal basis. Congratulations on your success.
Thank you. Ms. Kim.
Congrats to everyone in the class of 2020. The only thing I wanted to add here is some words from that great American philosopher, Dr. Seuss, who said that the more that you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. And I think that is more relevant than ever, particularly when we don't know what's ahead and we've seen things happen this year that we never expected. And that our learning forms changed, how we received it, and also how we communicated with each other. And so I would just encourage that continue the journey wherever you may be. Keep on reading, keep seeking out that learning, because it will lead you places. So best of luck.
Thank you. Did Mr. Krause join us? Okay. So I'm up next. Well, I want to start out by congratulating the class of 2020 on your success in completing high school. And now you're on to your next journey. And some of you may know where your path is going to lead you. It may be college or it may be directly into a career. But I want to tell you what I know and what I've learned in my life. You do have to believe in yourself. And as silly and simple as that you might find that to be, if you do not believe in yourself, it would be difficult for you to do your best work. I want you to learn confidence and that confidence to be able to do what you are destined to do and listen to those promptings of what your path should be. You can certainly listen to your mentors, and I think you should have mentors along the way. I certainly did. But I was a shy girl growing up in a very rural part of Mississippi, and I didn't start out believing in myself. And so that's why I want you to know, if you believe in yourself and you always do your best work, you should be incredibly successful. Congratulations again. Dr. Morrison, do you want to add your own congratulations at this time? I know we said we would do this with board members.
I am planning to do mine with Elizabeth offline, so I'll let you continue on for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Well, that concludes that portion. So let's now move into the presentation with Commissioner Schwinn. Commissioner Schwinn, I turn it over to you now.
Okay, wonderful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you. It's nice to see all of you, even from a distance. So Penny Schwinn, Commissioner of Education for the great state of Tennessee, and happy to be able to go over the last hour and 15 minutes ish with all of you around the department's response to COVID-19. I know and appreciate that we will be doing a little bit of the distance on slide changes, and so I'll go ahead and just move us through to the next slide. And part of that is just reorienting all of us. I know it's been a few months, but our strategic plan, Tennessee Best for All, is really focused on academics, whole child, and educators. And I think never before have we seen the importance of what a high-quality academic program can do for our students, the need to support the whole child, and certainly the importance of prioritizing and investing in our educators. in terms of what we will do through the agenda that you'll see on the next slide for this morning, it's really going to be focused on the needs assessment that's come through with our districts, the response to COVID-19 as we've seen it, a little bit of discussion on the CARES Act, and then a little bit of discussion on school reopening plans. And that will include, hopefully at the end, a conversation amongst all of us with some questions and answers, and certainly revisiting the policy topics that were brought up a little bit earlier in this board meeting. So starting off, looking at the updates from TDOE and the needs assessment. On the next slide, what you'll see is a framework related to things that have come up related in the needs assessment. So first and foremost, there are 4 big bucket areas that became challenges, I think, for us in the field, as a field, when the pandemic started. So we had distance instruction. So how do we go from 147 districts to a little over 1,800 schools to tens of thousands of essential schools when you're thinking about educating children in their homes? And so that distance instruction became a big part of the conversation. Second, targeted interventions and services for students. So when we think about what is necessary for children with disabilities, children who speak languages other than English, our highly mobile students, students in foster care, homeless, et cetera, providing those interventions and services that most students receive in school are so critical. And so thinking about what that means. In terms of instructional time, there's been a lot of conversation around what that looks like, and especially as we come back and children might be in different places. Certainly some students are accelerated, some students may be more behind than they might have been with Summer Slide. And so how do you think about those targeted interventions for instructional time, especially within the school day? We know that many of our districts are thinking about how they stagger, how they might restructure the 6.5 hours for students who are physically coming back in those cases. And certainly want to provide support there. And then technology and infrastructure, I think, has been a well-reported and well-documented concern across the country, but certainly in Tennessee, as we have seen that not only students, but teachers, our educators, have varying levels of access, especially from home. And so these are some of the things that came up. On the next slide, and looking to the 3-month outlook, from May until we reopen schools, there are a few things that I want to draw our attention to. So certainly as we close out May, we know that our LEAs have been addressing the current crisis for school year 1920. That's really been about the closure period and then some of the planning for next year. That's happening now into June. Many of our districts will finalize those plans towards the end of June and early July, especially as we get closer to opening schools and have a better idea of any health guidance that's going to be coming out. In June, we expect that one-time relief funds will be distributed to LEAs. That's the CARES Act, which I'll talk about a little bit later. In June and July, we know that we'll all be doing planning for school year 20 and 21. Our earliest districts in terms of opening will open in mid to late July. So that's when school reopening actually begins, and it goes through September. And then certainly in July and August, that's when school officially reopens in the state of Tennessee, depending on the local district and their locally driven calendars. Moving forward and just thinking about the strategic plan in the context of COVID on the next slide, what you'll see are a few things that we're really focusing on. So again, over the top, you'll see the priorities of the department's strategic plan, academics, whole child, and educators. Those remain our priorities, and frankly, what we have seen is that the priorities that we had essentially have become even more important. We know how important it is, especially for our youngest students who have not had the benefit of in-person teacher instruction, and we know how important that can be for literacy. We're spending a lot of time thinking about that. We have a lot of tools and resources we've put out as a department I'll talk about a little later. High-quality instructional materials, innovative assessments. What does that look like in a distance environment? What that means moving forward is a focus and an acceleration on online tools and resources as it relates to our strategic plan. In Whole Child, we had online tools, citizenship and civics education, and supports for special populations as part of the strategic plan. That continues to be, especially when we think about special populations, an area of focus, but we also know that we need to add some post-COVID additions related to school nutrition and then career exploration and counseling. How do we think about supporting all of our students in their academic and in their personal trajectories in their pre-K-12 experiences? And then with educators, we continue to think a lot about the vacancies that we have as a state, and we've spoken about that at length, but what did those teacher vacancies still need to get filled? So what does that look like when we are recruiting, retaining, and supporting our exceptional educators here in Tennessee? So growing your own ed prep and leader prep innovation, especially in a distance environment, and then leader development. Those things remain important and critical, and so certainly we're thinking about that in a digital format. And again, I'll talk about what that's meant in COVID a little bit later. And then I'm going to go through the next few slides relatively quickly because I know the meat of what everyone's interested in is later in the deck. But we did have a number of ways that we've been soliciting feedback, specifically on we had 25 letters from representative organizations, a district survey, and a general public survey. Going to the next slide and really wanting to focusing on the district priorities, what we saw is technology, special populations, mental health, and distance learning were the 4 key areas that we heard from our districts. In terms of the top 5 priorities from a spending perspective, it was technology, special pops, mental health, professional development, and online resources. But what you can see here is both a real need around technology. Only 8.5% of our districts report having a computer for each child to take home. So you think about that in terms of the gap analysis that we're going to need to do as a state, and frankly, the significant investment that it would take to ensure that if we have to go to a distance or virtual learning environment, every child, regardless of where they live, has equitable opportunities to access high quality content and materials. And certainly we know that if you have, the more resources you have, especially in this space, the easier and better and more effective it's going to be for our educators and districts to be able to reach students and provide them with high quality education opportunities. I think the other thing I want to bring up, and there's been some talk about the next 2 with special populations and mental health, but 9% of our districts report that they can meet the needs of all of their different groups in this distance learning format. I will speak later about some of the opportunities the department has and will continue to put out. But when we think about all students, one of the things that we're going to continue to reiterate is not if we provide education and a strong education for all kids, but how we do that. And the how is the really difficult part related to implementation. And so the one thing that we've done is we have an assistive technology grant that went out. There will be approximately 3 more, but it's how do you accommodate and then think differently and frankly in a very, very innovative space about how you provide the resources and support that children need, even when you cannot be with them. And then with mental health, I think something else that I just want to bring up, certainly with our strategic plan, incredibly important. But when you think about young children and high schoolers, middle schoolers as well, but really those elementary school grades, there are mental health and behavioral health supports that happen in our schools. But on top of that, we're also seeing that a number of our younger students actually really, really need, from a development perspective, that connection with their peers. They're doing a lot of learning from peer play and interaction, a lot of mimicking behaviors, which is part of their social development, and then certainly being able to have, I think, those critical moments related to play and social interaction that become very, very important for their development as people later. And so we're thinking about that in addition to some of the things that they would naturally hear, anxiety, et cetera, that can be produced with the pandemic. And so mental health supports will be critical coming back to school. On the next slide related to district needs, it's specific to technology support, internet access. And so you can see here some of the things that our districts did and some of their greatest needs related to distance learning. 87% said internet access for students was one of the greatest needs. 60% had access to a device. But you also see here that when you think about those districts that did not have these resources or were not able to do distance learning in this virtual environment, the cost of printing packets and distributing packets to individual families, especially those who could not come to the school for health or transportation reasons. Logistically and operationally, there are some significant challenges that our districts certainly provided feedback on and that we have and will continue to work to support. On the next slide related to the digital platform, what we saw is that 2/3 of our districts would like some kind of digital platform, even if it's not listed as a top need right now. Being able to toggle between a traditional classroom environment and then online or virtual teaching is very, very difficult. I think that sometimes in the broader landscape, we forget that teachers, part of the reason we're all in this business is that it's the interaction with children directly. And teaching in a virtual environment is very different than teaching in person. And so while that was not something that seemed like it was going to make the most sense for the last 2.5 months of school, there's been a lot more interest on what can be developed should we have needs going into next year. And the things that came up as the top requests from our districts were video lessons. We'll talk about the PBS work a little bit later. Formative assessments, so not in an evaluative way, but in a way to be able to continue to check on student progress, especially when you are not able to be directly with the student. Look over their shoulder, kneel down, see their work, and help them in that same way. How do we make sure that we're continuing to track student progress so we know that they are learning? Student work samples, so we can say here's the bar of what proficiency would be on this particular standard or lesson, and then virtual classroom tools. The next couple slides are on capacity. So on district capacity, what you see in the left-hand chart are these priority needs, and then for these groups. So on the left, priority needs, again, meals and nutrition and safety and wellness were the two top areas. Again, those are the things that we know many of our families rely on schools for. Our students come to school, many get breakfast, lunch, and snack at school. So when they are not able to come, there's a lot of, I think, stress in the system around that. And then safety and wellness, getting eyes on kids every day, doing those checks and being able to build those relationships is an incredibly important part of school. And what I've frankly been encouraged by is that we don't talk as much about that. I know we are all invested in academics. I'm very invested in academic progress. And I also know that part of what we do in education is that we help to build little children and young children into the people they are and who they will become. And in a distance environment, that becomes much more challenging, and we saw that reflected in the district surveys. And then certainly you can see that all of our special populations and student groups are top of mind of our districts as well. Going to the next slide, in terms of districts wanting support for serving students with disabilities, what we saw is that districts would like guidance for students with disabilities and those responsibilities, but they also need support for compensatory education. To clarify and provide a brief synopsis, I think we've got a 65-page guide that we put out that lots of states are taking and using, which is always good. We like to steal from one another. But compensatory education is when a service is required or that a child is entitled to a service, either in their IEP or part of as a result of a disability. They are not able to receive that service, and so the child is entitled to any level of service that gets them back to where they would have been should they have been receiving the services. That doesn't mean it's a one-to-one match. It's going to look different for every individual student and needs to be accounted for as such. But certainly knowing that some students had gaps in service, that there is a cost associated with that, and districts have some significant concern about the best ways to do that, especially with our budget situation. We also saw technology for students with disabilities was a significant concern. Many districts wanted to have more technology as a solution to providing service, and some students, even to be able to learn in a distance environment, will require additional assistive technology. The department put out a $1 million grant to support that work. Certainly we know that there's an incredible need, but we do feel the first and initial $1 million investment has helped many districts and will help many districts to be able to close some of that gap in terms of resource needs. And then just on the last slide, in terms of the needs assessment related to the current crisis, I wanted to make sure to include the voices of the people who provided feedback. We can always kind of bring data together, but I think some of the things that people are thinking and feeling continue to be incredibly important. So things like, my kids are worried about what's going on. Nothing like this has ever happened in theirs or my lifetime. I think that goes to the whole child and the need for, even if a child did not have counseling services prior to the pandemic, coming back, school might look different. It might feel different. It's been 5 or 6 months, and there's been all this news and talk and people looking different and acting differently. Many students have been confined in the home for long periods of time. Part of school reopening is going to have to be also welcoming children back and helping process what that means to have their learning and education disrupted and then restarted in such an abrupt way. Same thing with our educators. And thinking about what is front of mind for people. But we did see mental health and whole child support pop up significantly more than anything else outside of technology. In terms of the next section, really thinking about the updates from the department on the COVID response in particular, I'll start out with academics. And we've had a number of things that we've been working on. So we had a series of toolkits that have been on our website to help people look at free resources and schedules and things that they can use at the district and frankly at the home level. We had an early childhood and elementary school guide for families that's available in English and Spanish to help with home-based instruction. We have online televised and radio lessons. It was a partnership that the department has and will continue with PBS. I want to highlight this because I think that this is one of the best examples that we have related to when you have a state department, you have public groups, and you have educators across the state coming together for a common good, and that common good is the child. We made one call to PBS, and I cannot say enough positive things about the response. Within hours, it was, yes, how can we do this? Let's make sure we can get this done as quickly as possible. So just deep, tremendous thanks to the PBS affiliates across the state. Deep, tremendous thanks, bragging on my own team for a little bit. Our standards and material, our IT, our assessment, and our core teams, they worked their tails off, hundreds of hours of lessons, very, very long weeks, very, very long weeks to get that done. And then, of course, our educators who stepped in and stepped up to film the lessons. There's a couple of great pictures of teachers kind of setting up their iPhones or their personal phones on tripods and then trying to film lessons and making sure that their kids feel connected. My own kids watched the lessons, and I think it was always, there's something very special when you see a teacher, and in the one I'm thinking of, the first lesson that we saw, she did special call outs to the kids that she missed so much. And so I think that having that routine and routinized and very familiar way of getting education, we've heard a lot of positives from families. Tens of thousands of folks have logged in and watched those online and certainly on PBS. The Ready Rosie app is early literacy support. That will remain live and free through September. It's a partnership with the Governor's Early Literacy Foundation. What it does is they're quick 15-minute literacy or numeracy/math lessons that go to the parent's phone. They're fun activities, again, 15 minutes that you can do at home with your children. But again, with the early literacy, it's so hard to build that from a distance environment. This is one way in which we've been able to support that work at home and help families understand the ways that they can continue their own children's education, especially for those children just learning to read. Again, toolkits and lots of online resources, but those are some of the highlights from the academic space. Moving on to whole child, a number of things in this space as well. We had toolkits related to health and wellness, special populations, et cetera. Another thing that we put out was the school meal finder. Essentially, families can put in their address and find the closest place where school meals would be distributed. The Department of Education and the district operations team here did a fantastic job. Just want to give a big kudos to the nutrition team. Submitted more waivers, I think, than any other state, and submitted those waivers first because we knew how important it is and know how important it is for kids. So very, very grateful to that team. But it has allowed for free meals for any child 18 under the age of 18, whether or not they are enrolled in school, and that's multiple meals a day and per week. And so a lot of opportunities to make sure that our kiddos stay fed. We had a number of resources for children with disabilities, as well as some of the grants that I mentioned. We expect 3 additional grants to be announced over the next 4 to 5 weeks, specifically related to children with disabilities. And so we are looking forward to being able to continue to support work that is so important to so many kids. And then with educators on the next slide, a number of things here. We had the staffing toolkit, and then certainly a lot of guidance documents, worked closely with the State Board of Education. And so want to give a shout out to the State Board of Education staff being so responsive, and I think really, really good collaboration and partnership together. Certainly none of us have gone through a pandemic before, and so what do those policies look like? What do they need to be? And I deeply appreciated the inclusion of superintendents and districts in that policy-making conversation and the way in which the teams have collaborated together to make sure that we are thinking about kids first, and that is always a good feeling, especially at the state. We've had the no-cost spend endorsements, the Aspiring Assistant Principal Network, the launch of a Diverse Leaders Network. So the work continues. Again, kind of doubling down on the idea that we have to provide support to those people who are implementing in the field. It can't be kind of one-size-fits-all. We have to make sure we're addressing the needs of different folks in different places, and that's been exciting. But the 2 things that I think have been the most impactful in this short period of time have been the ways in which we've wanted to be able to support people in the field in a distance environment. So there was a partnership with the University of Tennessee at Knoxville to provide free professional development, and that is ongoing, modules for our principals to be able to kind of get the professional development and support for a distance environment. And then recently announced and launched a partnership with Trevecca to provide free professional development for any teacher in the state who wants it, to be able to, again, get free professional development for distance learning and teaching. And we have, I think at this point, over 11,000 teachers in the state who have signed up and are participating. Great response, and I think we want to continue to grow and expand that participation. We know how important it is and how hard it is to ask someone to completely change their practice on a dime. So been very, very grateful to our educators in the state. And then finally, related to systems, this is really focusing on some of the technology work on the next slide. So the systems work is related to toolkits and IT, funding, et cetera. We posted a lot of guidance. We have a number of waivers. Again, everything that we do is posted on our COVID website, on the Department of Education's website. But the two things that I would say that we've really focused on, so one is, beginning, I believe, in early February, the IT department started negotiating kind of bulk rates for purchasing computers or tablets at a low-cost rate. So our districts are now able to purchase off of that state contract in terms of the negotiated pricing. I think, cost-effective and affordable options. I think the lowest cost option is a computer for $180, all the way up to kind of fuller packages for other types of machines with some professional development built in, and that's around $350. So really affordable options when you think about the scope of purchasing at scale, and that's something that we're excited to offer. The IT department here is also offering concierge service to districts. So for budgeting and implementation, there's a form that districts can fill out, and then the IT team will help walk them through. Here's what it would cost, here's what it would look like, here's what setup looks like, to make sure that you have, again, not just the policy, not just kind of the guidance document, but strong implementation support, and been very appreciative to that team for that work. Next is really focusing on the CARES Act. And so on the next slide, want to just give a brief overview. The CARES Act provided $30.75 billion for the new Education Stabilization Fund, and that is $13 billion of which was set aside for elementary and secondary school emergency relief. There's a little bit of a description there, but what that means for Tennessee, looking at the next slide for dollar amounts and allowable uses, is we've got $259,891. $259,891,000 that will be available to the state of Tennessee for COVID-19 relief. And if you go to the next slide, it will talk a little bit about the use of those funds. 10% of that almost $260 million is a state reservation for scalable statewide solutions in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In speaking with the Department of Education at the federal level and to Secretary DeVos and her staff, the intent of these funds, these one-time relief funds, are to do some minor work for closing out this year, but really thinking about how do we support the response to the pandemic for next year, making sure that we are not all caught in the same way around having kind of emergency procedures, that we are able to have some funding to help us support what that might look like, and then certainly the need to be flexible in how we deliver education. 90% of those funds go to districts, and the period of availability was actually extended to September 30th of 2022. So we'll have 2 full years to spend those funds. What you can see, again, we keep reiterating, one-time relief funds is a number of things, and it's actually pretty flexible in terms of what the uses can be. And there's been some guidance from the department to make sure that districts are able to use that in a way that is most aligned with their local needs. And that the state should be responding in kind with what the district needs are. And so again, educational technology, summer learning and supplemental after-school programs, planning for long-term closures, special populations, mental health. You see the same things reiterated in the CARES Act legislation as you hear from districts. But there's lots of other activities, and those, again, are going to be things that are more specific to local needs. But we've heard a number of different strategies and continue to look forward to receiving those applications to get funds to districts as soon as possible. On the next slide, and looking at those timelines, you can see that it is quite the process. But the applications are out. They are live. Districts will have several weeks to be able to submit their funding applications, and then the department will approve those applications by June 30th so that funds are in school district coffers certainly by the next fiscal year. Districts will have access to guidance documents, and the department is also holding office hours a couple of times per week to be able to work with districts one-on-one and really try to dig down into what their specific local questions are and help walk through the application process. Again, this is about getting funds to districts for one-time relief aid in response to the pandemic. In terms of the next slide, for the SEA allocation of CARES Act funding, part of the process, the governor set up a review process for all of the state aid that's coming in from the federal level. And one of those, and so part of this is in our ESSER or CARES Act application. There was a question, I think from the board around what are some of the plans at the state level for how those funds would be used. This is the chart that was submitted as part of our CARES Act application. This is the funding mechanism that was provided to that review committee before it was sent to the Department of Education, and this is what was approved. So from an ESSER fund administration, we have a 10% set aside that is allowable, and that's for state agencies, so literally the Department of Education costs. And that's really pretty flexible in terms of use. Leadership development was $500,000. That's again for that online professional development and what we call digital badging, but the transition into an online platform and environment for teachers and leaders. Mental health and special populations online tool. Again, understanding how many of our districts have services and resources that would traditionally be given in person and are now looking to figure out what that looks like in an online format, wanting to create a space to have that. We hear a lot about telemedicine, but similar versions of that for our districts. The online tool and PBS, again, tens of thousands of folks are watching that. We want to make sure that we are able to continue that work, not just in the summer, which we will continue through the summer, but to expand that into next year for those districts who need it. Technology, so wanting to make sure that we can offer competitive technology grants for districts who are looking to go to one-to-one. We know that that funding is going to be incredibly important to them. And then the last three are really around innovation, grow your own, and accelerator. The Innovation Fund is competitive grants, and those are for districts who want to try new and innovative instructional models at scale, specifically focusing on some of our most underserved and high needs populations. Again, thinking about what could be. We've got a number of districts who could do things at a small scale and just need additional funding to broaden that out. For Grow Your Own, we know that now more than ever vacancies are going to be critical to fill, especially if we're thinking about some districts who are focusing on social distancing in classrooms, meaning that they will need more classrooms to staff. And so having a Grow Your Own and making sure that we continue that work allows for us to not get into a bad place several years from now and have more vacancies than we can fill. And then the Accelerator Fund is intended to be a fund for those districts who have a district-wide strategy, but are just short in terms of their CARES Act money to actually fund that strategy. So you can imagine a district who maybe has 1,000 students. They want to go to one-to-one, but they're $25,000, $50,000 short of being able to afford that in their budget. This Accelerator Fund will help to close the gap for some of those strategies, especially for our districts who are just short just a little bit of money, especially with these tight budget times. So that is the CARES Act application. In terms of school reopening, going into the next, and I'm going to talk pretty high level about this. Most of our documents are under review, as you can imagine, the number of people who need to review anything, especially as it has to do with health and wellness of our children. The department will be putting out, starting this afternoon and going through next week and the week after, a series of guidance documents. The first is a broader LEA guide. That is kind of a big picture guidance framework document about different ways in which people might think about school reopening and some of the considerations. It will be questions as well as some specific guidance and resources there. We also have school reopening toolkits. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 23 school reopening toolkits, so similar to the school closure toolkits. These would be a reopening version of that. That includes guidance, information, ways to think about your approach at the school level. It also includes a series of checklists, websites, templates that districts and schools can use. We will have a list of that, and that list is included in the LEA guide. I'm also happy to talk through what we are expecting there. We will have procedure samples and videos. Some of the feedback that we heard specifically from districts has been that it is wonderful to have so many frameworks and resources available, but at the end of the day, when you actually try to implement, that is very different than just painting we have to do something. So everything in our house ends up being about sports. So it's you can certainly give a kid a basketball and say, go ahead and make a basket, but that's a little bit trickier. So how do we support schools to think about not just being 6 feet apart, but how do you actually plan for what that looks like? What are the specific strategic steps you have to take? If you are going to do a health screen upon entering the building, you certainly can't have 100 kids rushing the door at once and think that that's going to work. So very specific procedures, videos, and photographs to help walk our districts and schools through any procedures they may or may not want to implement at the local level. Again, all of these are going to be locally driven decisions that will need to happen with districts, schools, and certainly including stakeholders. Continuity of instruction plans, so having a template that is more reflective of the response to the pandemic. We will be working obviously closely with the State Board of Education. You all will be driving the policy conversation on virtual learning and distance learning. What are parameters that need to be in place to meet the statutory requirements of 180 days of school, 6.5 hours of instruction per day. So looking forward to that conversation. I know that's going to come over the next several weeks, but certainly we want to make sure as we're approving those plans in alignment with state statute and certainly state board policy that we have templates and resources available. And then we'll be offering LEA technical assistance through our core regional offices as well as in the department for districts who need specific support. In terms of the actual toolkits that will be available for our districts, we are focusing on academics, assessment and evaluation, public charter and non-public schools, child care, communications, consolidated funding, counseling, equitable access and opportunity, finance, governance and management, health, nutrition, post-secondary transitions, professional development, safety and operations, school improvement, social distancing, special populations, staffing, technology, transportation, and well-being. So we've been hard at work on quite a few documents. And as I said, because it has to do with health, safety, and wellness of our children and our staff in our schools, we want to make sure that all the appropriate people are taking all of the very microscopic looks at everything, which is, I think, always in the best interest of folks. In terms of the next section and wanting to spend a little bit of time on what will be in that LEA guide, which will be one of the first documents we put out, we'll be thinking about the roles and experience of teams and stakeholders. One of the questions that we get quite a bit from districts is that there are a lot of people and everyone has a lot of work to do, but how can we start to think critically and thoughtfully in terms of guidance about what is the right grain size for different folks within the system? And so certainly that will always be driven at the local level, but we have been asked for some guidance and support in that space. From a planning perspective, you can see here a number of things that have been requested. But certainly we want to talk through some general planning and data considerations. Specifically, what are the different data points that you might want to consider at the school or district level to gauge and evaluate your own reopening procedures and success? The different phases that we'll be moving through this year, some best practices in terms of if you're creating procedures, what that can and should look like, and then certainly considerations and calendar options. I think that the most direct and obvious thing is that you're either going to be in school, you're going to be out of school in terms of physical building, or you're doing some combination. Like those are the three options. But what we found is that there are a lot of very specific routes within each of those three buckets. And so what you'll see in the calendar and options are some more specific examples of different pathways districts can follow. The financial and resources component are very real, obviously, and I think we saw the Tennessean article about this week that talked about the 12% cut from the state agency perspective. We also know this is a real consideration for our local districts as they think about their local budgets and tax collection revenues, et cetera. And so we want to be thoughtful about providing recommendations that are also feasible within local budgets, saying that people have to buy tons of expensive equipment where they are potentially struggling to meet their current obligations in terms of their budgets. Is unrealistic and I think an unfair expectation. And so as a department, we want to make sure we're providing a myriad of options for those districts who have funds to purchase significantly additional resources and those districts who are going to be quite strapped. We'll talk a little bit about communications and some strategies there, and then certainly the different phases of reopening as we move not just from the beginning of the school year, but then what that can mean throughout the rest of the year. And then what you'll see on the next slide is just a repeat of some of the school reopening toolkits. That's about 75% of them, but just wanted to give a sense of the broad nature of what will be available to our districts. Again, much more small grain size in terms of what people will be able to use. And then on the next slide related to procedures, samples and videos, this again, example, I'm saying that for the benefit of our great Christy Ballard, who would want me to put that in red, bold, underlined, and italicized. But they are example and sample procedures, certainly driven at the local level. But again, when you're thinking about trying to change the way in which you do business, and many districts are in different phases of that, we want to make sure that we are using examples that have been given to us by our own school districts that they are using, and then provide video and pictures to help people understand what that can look like. And some things are as simple as a water fountain. We were videotaping in just outside of Memphis last, or it might have been this week. And what we saw was that, how do you get kids water if we're not supposed to use drinking fountains, or at that school that policy might not be to use drinking fountains? What does the water distribution look like? Are you requiring people to bring in water bottles? Do you have a way to fill those water bottles, et cetera? That is a very, very small example, but it's something that when you think about that extrapolated across all of the different procedures and activities we do in our public schools, which are not designed to, I think, respond to pandemics in this way, how we're thinking very strategically through those procedures. And this document hopefully will help districts kind of spark some ideas about how they may want to address those considerations. And then the last slide before kind of jumping into Q&A and SBE policies, just the continuity of instruction plans, what the department will be putting out are templates, some technical assistance modules that can be self-driven from districts to help with their local planning should they want to use them. And then certainly our core office will continue to provide supports to districts as they have been. We've been very, very grateful for the district participation. We have calls 3 times per week with our superintendents, and then any of the staff that they bring onto those calls. And I think that some of the best calls have been when we've had our superintendents come on board and talk about the things that they are doing and share with one another. Certainly we want to continue to mimic and replicate those best practices, and CORE has been especially helpful in being able to elevate and escalate some of those conversations and make sure that we can spread that. And so very grateful to CORE superintendents and TOS for their support, especially the last 3 months. And so with that, the next and final 2 slides are just on SBE policy considerations that I know had come up earlier in the school board meeting, or I'm sorry, the state board meeting, but LEA requested policies, virtual school policies, and other things that y'all may want to consider, and we're certainly happy to support and think through and work with districts on, but happy to take any questions or engage in any conversation that makes sense, and I will, with that, turn it back over to you, Chairwoman Hargrove. I tried to keep within my time.
Thank you, Mr. Schwinn. I know that we have a lot of information to share with us, and we appreciate the update on all the work that took place with your team supporting the districts in the time of having to close the schools, as well as getting them ready for and planning what reopening would look like and giving them guidance documents. I do want to open up the floor to the board members to ask questions that they may have for you before we get into the discussion about some policy considerations. Board members.
Madam Chair, Bob Eby.
Yes, Mr. Eby.
All I can say is wow. Y'all have done a lot of work, that's for sure, and there certainly is a lot of work to do. I do have a couple of questions. One, just kind of a recent question. Last night, and I guess the House voted out the literacy bill, and my understanding is that there may be some expectation there that some of that funding might be coming out of the CARES Act. And looking at your slides here, I agree that the CARES Act is very broad. You can almost drive a truck through it in some respects. But I don't see, and you did mention it was a one-time only thing, and this literacy bill looks like it's multiple year funding. So how do we get through that, or your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I think I muted myself. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a really great question. One of the things as part of our process is we developed the CARES Act application. The focus, and I will actually pull up some of the direct guidance from the department, but the U.S. Department of Education said that the fund is for the state agency and local education agencies to provide emergency relief to address the impact that COVID-19 has had in our districts. And so we put together, I think, a budget proposal went through the review committees, like I said, that included some members from the Senate and from the House, as well as some state agencies, and submitted that. And that is what was approved by Secretary DeVos. The focus of the CARES Act proposal that was approved is around those kind of, frankly, escalated needs of our districts, and technology being, I think, first and foremost on that list, and how we support that. I think that one of the things that we're really thinking about is, if we're going to support districts going into next year, what does and can and should that look like, especially for the COVID-19 response. And so I think what you see in the proposal that was approved, and I think that was May 22nd, that was the intent of the CARES funds from the state aid perspective. In terms of any pending legislation in those conversations, certainly we will continue to watch and see what the legislature ends up approving, and how that progresses. But at this point, what you see in our slide is what's been approved by the U.S. Department of Education.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chair, if I could ask one more question, then I'll yield and let somebody else ask some questions, and I come back later.
Please proceed.
So it appears to me, we're still, having been a former local Board of Education member, I believe in local autonomy. And it appears, as you said before, these are going to be locally driven decisions, a lot of these decisions, and you're putting out guidelines and let the local boards decide. However, in this situation, I think about, we approved a course access, request today, and you're talking about the cost, the large cost that's going to be, and there are a lot of districts that aren't going to be able to fund this. I mean, revenues just aren't there in the local districts. The states have its own problems. And we thought about, or do we have organizations working together like the districts, like the state board and PDOE and the commissions and the legislature that can reinvent or think about what we might do? Maybe we open up course access, and I'm speaking for Bob Eby. I haven't said this to anybody else, so this is just my can we open up and say, one district provide math to several schools, because we're going to have a shortage of teachers. If we're talking about, and I don't know if we're talking about distance learning or, and you have the classes to half size and you have double, that's going to put demands on teachers. But do we have people working together to how you can solve, instead of just putting out toolkits and guidelines that look at the big problem and how we're solving that? That makes sense.
It does. And if I might, Chairman Hargrove, if I can respond to some of the things we're thinking about. So I agree. This has been, and, we always kind of say it's like the lemonade, try to make the best of what you got. But one of the things that I think has been genuinely positive, and I think a cause for even more optimism than I think I've had in a long time, is seeing how our districts have come together with one another and then within their districts. And so I totally agree that this might be a time to have some really important conversations on course access, some conversations on ways in which we can create scaled opportunities. I'm going to give two examples. So one is the PBS lessons that I talked about. The department put out a grant recently that gives districts some pretty sizable dollars to film entire sets of lessons that can then be put online, so that you can imagine that a child who is in school for 40 days and then maybe there's some closure that needs to happen for 10, you can assign lessons 41 through 60 to that child, download it on a computer, and the child can still have that same lesson just as they would have, same material, same interaction there in a Tennessee teacher. You can have that and scale it so people don't have to repeat the same thing. We're all sharing those same resources. And I've been just so encouraged by the number of districts who've raised their hand and said, I'll pitch in here, I'll pitch in there. And I think the same thing with some grant opportunities we have at the federal level. Certainly those are competitive. We in no way take that for granted and may not get them. But how do we think about that course access so that if you have an AP chemistry class, is there a way that you could do that where it's broadcast to the entire state, and you actually need fewer teachers to be able to fill some of those gaps that we just can't fill right now in terms of vacancies? So totally, obviously very excited about your comment, but completely agree that it's an exciting direction to go.
Thank you.
And I have a follow-up question to that. So with the PBS relationship, PBS is providing the online platform, and I know that during the spring, after closures occurred, I dialed in myself to see it on the actual PBS local station here. So it's my understanding they're providing the platform. Is that correct? And the other pieces of it, the content comes from the state of Tennessee, not from PBS directly, or are they providing supplemental instructional materials?
Yes, that's a great question. And so it's a little bit of both. So the PBS, they're providing us the airtime, and that's, I think, the most valuable thing, certainly. But there's a big block of time in the middle of the day and then some overnight hours. And so they're providing that. I know they also have materials on their website as we have it on our YouTube station. We will be rolling out an online tool in the next couple of weeks that will also house all of those in a more kind of, I think, parent-friendly version from the state perspective, certainly also being able to access resources from PBS. The videos themselves are taped in Tennessee classrooms, Tennessee districts, Tennessee teachers, and were taped kind of over that 4 weeks from the time we announced the partnership. I think it might not even been 4 weeks, but towards the end of March and early April, we worked with districts to film hundreds of hours of content, gave that to PBS, and then they got that uploaded online and on their various affiliates. So super exciting, but they also provided supplemental academic content, and that's what they'll have throughout the summer on behalf of families in the department.
So this was predominantly for elementary and middle, I believe, but certainly not high school, correct?
That's right. It was 1st through 8th grade to have more of the traditional classroom experience, and then there's resources for high schoolers for things that they're able to access based on their age.
So at this juncture, do you have confidence that moving forward, we could do this for all grade levels and ensure that they're aligned to state standards?
I think so. I will hedge a little bit and say I think that we are working very hard to ensure for ELA and for math that we would have an option for 1st through 8th grade specifically in terms of being able to have those videos, and not just in I think what we had in the late spring was academic content. What we're aiming for next year is to have a cohesive set of videos that actually play in the same kind of scope and sequence that many of our districts use. And again, it is not the Department of Education driving that. It is districts working at the local level to do the videos and use materials that they are using, and then we're essentially giving them a grant to film what they're doing. So we expect to have lots of different options for grades in ELA and in math. I think in an ideal world, we'd be able to expand that into science and social studies, but we are prioritizing those grades. High school gets a little bit more challenging just because of the variance in terms of courses and pathways, but we're thinking through some solutions to support high schools in that space. But I love the idea and would love to be able to continue the conversation with the board around being able to have some of those high school classes that are broadcast live and then be able to have resources for students in terms of the support they need. And there's one other state in particular who's looking at doing something at scale. And so that might give us an ability to kind of take our resources together and get something done faster and frankly at lower cost to Tennessee.
Thank you for that. And I do want to follow up again with regard to the online access, online platforms. You've heard it a lot. I've heard it. I've been with school districts for the last 3 or 4 weeks in a row, just listening to them, sharing what they're doing best practices, learning from each other. And time again is we need an online platform that's available to everyone across the board. And they were not thinking about the PBS solution. They were thinking about instructional materials because their students, they're hearing from parents. We're getting calls and we're getting queries from online academies across the U.S. who want to teach our children and take them out of Tennessee school systems. So just wanted to hear more from you about that and what you're thinking from the TDOE perspective.
Yeah, and so I want to reiterate that I think that, number one, it is important that our districts feel like they have strong solutions at low or no cost for their kids and their families. And so part of what you saw in terms of the needs assessment were those online resources and online tools. One of the things from the state set aside for the CARES Act is essentially to pay for this tool that you're referencing in terms of the videos and the resources. It was part of our strategic plan. The timeline on that original project plan, I think, was 2 or 3 years. We're accelerating that to 6 months. to get something out. But the idea is that by August, if I am a school district, I would be able to go onto the tool, see some breakdowns and information related to the standards and content, have information related to assessment so you can create small and modular assessments to check and monitor student progress, and then to have a suite of resources related to instructional materials, teacher guides, and then videos of the actual content. You could imagine two use cases there. One is, like I suggested, whether students are completely at home or at home and in person throughout the year. You could actually watch the lessons just like you would watch it in class, and then have teachers and district personnel be able to communicate with the students through various online or on the phone to help walk them through areas of difficulty or challenge. But you can also imagine, let's say students are coming back and it's a full physical in-person environment, and they all have different needs for potentially remediation or acceleration. You could still assign specific lessons on the video to different children based on what their needs are as a way of support and even more expansive differentiation within classrooms using materials that they're already familiar with. And so all of that we are building and escalating. We think that that's going to be ready as early as August, but go through November in terms of development. And then certainly we was able to negotiate somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $7 million worth of additional services or money back from our assessment contract to be able to provide some of the online work that is going to be helpful for developing interim and formative assessments at the local level for local use as they see fit.
Okay. Like Bob, I have more questions, but I do want to stop and open up the floor to other members. Thank you.
Commissioner, this is Nick Darnell. I know that, you know, before you release these documents and you want to make sure that they're correct. I know that's time intensive, and kudos to you and your staff for all the work that you've put in. I think it's been great with what the situation is. You all handled it well. So just to pick your brain, when would you estimate some of that information will begin to be released to school districts, parents, students?
Yeah, so it'll start as early as this afternoon, depending on when we get things back, and all through next week and the week after.
Because I know, you know, the teacher brain in me is, you know, already in 2021, and you know, hopefully, of course, we don't know what's to come, but you know, we would love to see our students back in the buildings, if at all possible. But I understand, you know, in some situations that's not the safest option.
Yeah, I think, you know, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's the because it's the perspective of the parent, the teacher, the child, the people who are kind of in those buildings around the emotional and, frankly, whether it's the professional need, but there is something about the physical presence of being in school. I have a new third grader next year, and then my little Abby's going to be in kindergarten. And so just even thinking about what does that mean if she starts in a remote environment and then transitions to school slightly later, or she's coming to school, but it looks different. And I think those are some of the things that I think are really important conversations, and I don't want to get us off track, but I do want to validate and acknowledge in a very, very significant way, I think, the root of what you're talking about, and that is how are our teachers and our principals going to feel, and what is that experience if we're coming back into schools and it doesn't look the same. Chelsea Crawford, our new chief of staff, and I were doing kind of a taping of desks to show 6 feet and setting up classrooms in one of our districts in East Tennessee. And what we had some teachers come in and say, hey, like, look, you're the ones who will be running these classrooms. You have feedback, you have ideas. How would you change? What are your reactions? And what was one of the most impactful moments that I've had in the pandemic and thinking about this was the physical reaction and the emotional reaction of seeing our educators visually see what would happen in classrooms, that maybe kids aren't sitting on the carpet together. Maybe you have to move the desks, and what that means for their teaching and their interactions with their students. Knowing those interactions are so critical. And I don't think we've spoken enough about that and how important that is for our educators and for our kids. And so some of the guidance we're going to be putting out is, frankly, validating and acknowledging that this is super hard, and really recommending that we bring educators in before we go back to school start looking at what those setups might be, because it's going to take some time to process changes that may or may not be driven at the local level. But I want to underscore how much I appreciate you bringing that up, because I, as a parent and as a former teacher, and then certainly as a commissioner, but seeing the difference physically, not just in kind of print media, but in the classrooms, it changes your perspective on how serious some of this might be in terms of how we run schools.
Other comments or questions from board members?
This is Darrell Cobbins.
Yes, Darrell.
Just a question about the section where you discussed students with disabilities, and just wanted to know, considering the fact that some members of that population of students may have challenges with remote learning and have become accustomed to sort of proximity, being close, teachers and certain personalities and those types of things. And in addition to that, the services that they've relied on as far as their IEP. With all these moving parts, just for the typical student, how do we take into account those issues and how they relate to those students who, you can't sit in front of a computer for 2 hours and tell them to do their schoolwork?
Yeah, and so I think that's an incredibly important question related to children with disabilities. And then you think about that in distance learning in general, when you look at all of the different factors that go into any individual child. When you think of age, location, vehicle, or format of learning, and then you throw in some additional components. And you can imagine English learners have a similar experience where they rely on some additional supports that are in school. I'm going to have an answer of what we're doing about it, and then probably a more frustrating answer, which is where we go from here. But the Assistive Technology Grant was a start. You'll see some additional grants that are geared towards some of the lessons that we've learned nationally and certainly in Tennessee, coming out of here's what's worked, here's what didn't, and here's where the greatest need is for investment. So we're going to be putting in somewhere in the neighborhood of another $5 or $6 million worth of resources and supports going into next year to address that very question. And frankly, and I think what's really challenging is that there are some services that are most effectively delivered in person. What you'll see in the guidance documents that we're putting out is that's part of the consideration around welcoming students back. I've read, I don't know how many thousands of pages of things that have been happening related to this in school systems. And so you're seeing some countries and places that are bringing back specifically children with disabilities first, or children who have exceptional or additional needs first, because there's a recognition that there's just not the ability to learn in the same way from a distance environment. So that's one of the things you'll see in the guide. Not that we are requiring or that we're mandating that, but it is certainly a consideration. In that same way, one of the things that you'll see in the LEA guide is a push on best practice, which is any policy, any procedure, any initiative or program that is put into place to reopen schools and run schools differently needs to be thought of from the end user perspective for each individual user. So you can imagine, for example, hallway procedures. There's a lot of around kind of one-way directional hallways. Well, what does that mean for a stakeholder, a child, a family member, a teacher who has a physical disability or who might be in a cast and can't necessarily go up the stairs or has to go a different way? How do you think about a procedure for a family who is unable to ride the bus now because of the bus route changes? How are you addressing so everyone has the same access? Super important questions. The frustrating part is we don't have all the answers to all of them. That's part of what will be in the reopening toolkits, and frankly, part of it is it's going to look different in every district. Our responsibility is to provide office hours, technical assistance, and support to help people talk through and think through what that can mean. But it is critically important. And again, it's not if we provide supports for all kids, it's how we do so.
Other questions or comments? And Daryl, did you have a follow-up? Okay. Other members? Bob, let's go back to you. I think you said you had another one or two questions.
Yes, thank you. So this question has to do with sort of the needs assessment that you talked about. How what's the process, since we didn't do testing last year, to evaluate where the students are and then look at the recovery for those that maybe, I think they're going to come back at several different levels. I think some parents probably did an exceptional job of homeschooling and others probably didn't do as well. And so how do you go through that process and then evaluate that and try to get the students back on? Is that a local decision, or are we going to help in that way, anyway?
Yeah, so it's definitely a local decision, and the department will be providing a number of resources. So first and foremost, part of the legislation that was passed in the early spring session had to do with providing an assessment for local discretion to use at the end of the year. We didn't have any districts who elected to use that assessment. However, we are doing what we call a quick form or a short form that districts will be able to use at the beginning of next year. What that means is, let's say you have a 4th grade student, you would have access to the much shorter version of the 3rd grade summative assessment. And you can give those assessments to students within the first few weeks of school. I would not recommend the first week or so, but moving into that kind of towards the end of the first month of school, you'd be able to give that assessment, be able to see where the child was in terms of mastery of the prior year standards and any big gap areas for standards or groups of standards. We would then be able to have and direct from a guidance perspective, if a child is not yet at mastery or proficiency for this standard or group, here are some remediation or support activities that you might consider at the local level. That guidance and those resources will be available free and optional to use with and for all of our districts. And then on top of that, we're developing smaller testlets and forms that districts can use throughout the year for free if they choose to do so, that will help monitor and track progress. One of the toolkits that we're putting out is on assessment, evaluation, and support for students. And that's really going to be focusing on how do you use assessment, not in an evaluation way, not in an accountability way, but really what it's intended for, which is checking for understanding, proficiency, and mastery of content to inform instruction and support. And that's where we think using that online tool can help with providing the very different needs of kids in a classroom. I was talking to my sister, who's a middle school math teacher. I'm trying to get her over here because I know we're short on those. But what she was saying is, I'm used to kids coming in. We usually see a little bit of a bigger summer slide with math than we do anything else. It's also easier to catch that up. But she's like, what I'm seeing in terms of where those gaps might be is usually here. And now I know that with kind of the longer time that we've been out of school, 5 or 6 months, the need of my students is just going to be so much greater because some are going to really dove in and they might be accelerated, and some might be, 2/3 of a year behind. I am responsible for all of their learning and growth and movement. And so we're hoping that these resources help our students with that.
Thank you.
Of course.
Bob, did you have another question? Because I have a couple.
Something else? Look at my notes, but I'll pass right now.
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question. That was one of mine. And one of the things that I'd like for you to clarify for us with the pool of money from the CARES Act that would go to school districts, are the districts required to apply as if they were applying for a grant? What's the process there?
Yeah, so they will apply using ePlan, which is the way in which they apply for many of the grants. One of the things our Eve Carney, Debbie Thompson, and the federal programs team, they are, I will say, the best I've seen in the country ever on this work. And so they had the guidance documents and everything ready to go when they hit go, and they also have a number of webinars that districts can use. Some of the things that that means is districts apply using ePlan. It's a super simple form. It is intended to be information that we need because we have to report to the federal government or we have to track the grant. We are being very, very flexible in terms of parameters on it, and that's available now. Districts can submit their applications at any time.
Does every district have the opportunity to receive an equal amount of money, the same amount of money? Because if you just divide the figure, it's almost $2.5 million per district if all things were being, were equal.
No, so the guidance that was provided from the U.S. Department of Education was that the state allocate money to districts in the same way it was allocated to, similar to how it was allocated to states. So it was allocated using the fiscal year 19 Title I proportions. So different districts received different per student amounts, but it was aligned to that Title I allocation as prescribed in CARES.
Okay. So do the districts have they have an understanding of the amount that they can receive? Is that understood by them?
Yes, so every district has the amount of money that they're being allocated.
Okay, good. Who is on the Child Wellbeing Task Force? Has that list been published? I'm just curious who's participating there.
I'm not sure if that list has been published. I would have to be able to get back to you on the list of names. I know that there's a task force and then there's an advisory committee that will go over that. I believe that we're working with the administration on a big announcement on that. One of the deliverables that they have is at the end of June, they'll be providing a report to the department, to the state board, and to our public officials around the COVID response is kind of the first deliverable. Here's what went well, here's where we really need to focus, and here are recommendations. And then throughout the summer, really galvanizing community resources to support kids. That will also move into next year for reopening. They'll have a similar report for reopening and then tracking student progress throughout the year.
Okay, thank you for that. Bob, I think you have another question or two.
It's not a question, it's just as basically as a comment, is that some districts are going to do well, some districts are going to struggle, whether it's from cost or whether it's whatever. But I think one of the key things is to continue communications across the state. And as districts that do well, we ought to do lessons learned, share that, be sure that gets shared. I had a mentor 40 years ago who showed me this thing. He had a card in his pocket, and he pulled it out and he said, "Evie, if you ever learned anything," he said, "have this card." And it says, "Who else needs to know?" And so I think that's important for us all to recognize that we're in this together, as we say, but what can we do to help each other out? And I think communication is the key.
I think there's certainly a variety of ways to do that, and I'm witnessing it through the Director Study Council. And as you indicated, Commissioner, your individuals who are or the regional directors, they're there, and then I know they're reporting back up to your team. And I know that's one way that that knowledge is being shared. But I think TOS and some of our other partners can help us in that regard, because every year there's the TOS event, and certainly through other conferences that you host around the state, we can certainly get that message out. Because otherwise, I'm sure you're thinking of all the ways that you could possibly do that. But anything else you want to add on that? And then we need to move on to the last subject matter on our agenda regarding policy decisions.
No, I mean, the only thing I'll say on the communications front is that the department plans to continue some of the communications effort, some heightened and ramped up communications efforts. So we'll continue our 3 times a week calls with superintendents, and then the one-on-one calls we do 1 or 2 times a week. We also started the weekly kind of stakeholder affinity group emails that go out on either Monday or Friday, depending on what various interests are. And those are COVID updates as well as regular updates. And I think that we've gotten some good feedback on that because it links to all sorts of other pieces and core offices. So couldn't agree more that communication has become, I think, one of the most important things that we can all do, and appreciate, and want to reiterate my appreciation on behalf of the department to the state board staff. I think their level of communication with our team and our team with theirs has significantly impacted the way that we're able to serve districts. And so just want to kind of provide some bragging to your team on what a fantastic job they're doing.
Well, thank you for those comments, because we all know communication is critical. We've talked about this in the past, and now more than ever, being in lockstep and having those deep conversations about what we need to be doing to make sure that our students are being educated, especially during this time of pandemic. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, Commissioner, I don't know if there's anything else you want to share. I don't know that there's any last minute comments or questions from board members, but I know we're running out of time. And I want to thank you so much for that presentation. It was enlightening, I think. I know it was for me. I had heard a lot of this from the directors, but hearing it straight from you and the next stages in the process was critically important. Anything else before we get into the other portion?
No, just thank you for the time. Really appreciate the opportunity. And it's nice to see your faces.
It's nice to see yours too. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to thank you. You're welcome to stick with us. Sarah, I want to turn it over to you because I know that there have been policy discussions that have been happening, and so I want you to share with the board because I know there are other things that we're going to need to consider, things that the commissioner and her team are hearing from districts, and certainly I'm hearing things relative to my mind thinking that's a policy revision that needs to take place. So do you want to jump in, Sarah, and take it from there?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for those words. We always like working with your team, and particularly now, just appreciate and value the close partnership on some of these issues affecting our schools and students. It feels like the clock is just, we're just trying to beat the clock on some of these decisions. Our board came together in April, as all of you know, to make some decisions about this past school year now, essentially, and how to close out and mitigate some of the impact on students who are graduating and other issues affecting this past school year. But as I mentioned then, a lot of the biggest decisions were still ahead of us. So appreciate the update from our commissioner on all the things that the department has been doing to support districts in this interim period since we last met in April. There's just been a lot of good work happening, a lot of resources being shared, a lot of guidance documents, as she mentioned, that are coming out soon. And so what our team has been trying to focus on in partnership with the department is, what is the board's role here in terms of some of the policy and rule decisions that need to be made ahead of the coming school year. Right now, the form that that's taking primarily is what we're calling continuous learning plans. And the commissioner mentioned this in terms of ensuring that as we move into the next school year and certainly into the future, if something like this, God forbid, should happen again, or other reasons that schools may have to close and send students into a remote learning environment in the future, whether it's because of the regular flu or other weather-related events, we want to make sure that we're all prepared. We were not prepared this spring for what we all encountered in terms of needing to send students home and try to move online for a lot of the delivery of instruction. And so moving into the next school year, we want to make sure that we're asking the right questions of ourselves at the state level and certainly of our districts so that we can be prepared to serve students in an environment that might be changing from month to month, week to week, depending on what part of the state we're in and what the health crisis looks like as we enter the fall. So there will be more coming out soon as we work closely with the department and with our stakeholders to provide review of what I think will be a policy and a rule around continuous learning plans. A lot of that information will be just kind of teeing up districts to ask and answer questions about how they'll provide learning across K through 12 if needed to be done remotely. So it'll build on some of our virtual learning plans or virtual learning policies and rules that the board already has in place. But we'll be moving quickly to bring something to you probably before the July meeting. There's a lot of work that needs to happen between now and then, but stay tuned for that and just know that we're trying to do our best to learn from other states, from other national organizations, and certainly from our leaders across Tennessee about the kinds of questions that we need to be answering together and what form that should take in terms of the state board's rule and policy around, particularly, like I said, this idea of continuous learning in a remote environment. So I'll stop there. Does that kind of sum it up, Madam Chair? Are there other things you think would be important to mention at this point in time or questions from members?
I know we're running out of time, but I think it's important to say that the districts are already planning hybrid, not all of them, but many of them are planning to function in a hybrid setting, meaning that some students will be in the classroom and some students will work remotely and do online learning. But they will switch it up. I think the game plan is some students will go on a certain day, others another day. But to be able to keep the social distancing, they're already planning for that. And I know that they want more advice and guidance and support from the state with regard to that. And so I think as soon as we can put out some guiding documents or even ask them to provide us with their plan is, whether it's in rule or policy or however we decide that it must be, but they're already planning that. They know that. We all know that. What we don't know is what's going to happen in the fall. Will there be a resurgence? Will they be able to actually stay in the school setting? Will they have to shut down again? And even if they try this hybrid model, there still are plans that need to be outlined more specifically, and they're doing their best trying to figure it out on their own. So I would say the July timeframe is really, it's critically important, as we know. Can we figure it all out? Can it be ironclad? No, this is an ever-changing and ever-evolving situation. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I'm hearing things like, attendance. And so if we are in this virtual world, virtual learning, instructing, how do we hold parents accountable for ensuring that they're doing what they're supposed to do, because it becomes more complicated for a teacher, for a principal to hold themselves accountable for attendance if in fact the parents are not allowing their children to participate. And that's assuming they have devices and they have access, et cetera. So those are things I think we need to be thinking about. There are others, but I'll stop and find out if anybody else wants to jump in and share anything. Any other members? Okay. We're near the time to close this out. If there's no other discussion about that, before I adjourn, I was informed that from Elizabeth and through Sarah, that our video taping of our congratulations and advice to the seniors did not go as well as we had planned. We're very small. It's just like we see each other, the way that we see each other. She would like, if you all are able to stick with us a little bit longer, she would like to retape each of your advice to the seniors. Now, there's no pressure for us to do that. It's just she's asking if you can hang with us. And Commissioner Schwinn, we'd love for you to be engaged in that process. I think you've done some of that, but I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity as well. Let's find out if it's possible for each member to stay, because I think if we're doing just a couple of us, I don't know that makes sense. But I look to Sarah to give us some guidance on what Elizabeth is thinking in that realm.
I'll defer to Elizabeth. We've been texting about it, but I think the idea is that she wants full screen messages. So hopefully that was a good dry run for folks, and we can look to Elizabeth in terms of guidance now that we're done with our public meeting.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about all of this. I know it's a big ask, but I think we can put together a really great looking video for everyone if we can have our board members hang back for just a few more moments and repeat their remarks.
Let me ask this. Is there any objection to any of the board members? I know we're at the noon hour, and some of you may have to leave us. So let's just find out who has to leave now.
I can re-record, but I can't. I'll need to leave pretty soon. I've got to head out to ORNL. So,
Okay.
But I can redo it.
All right. Thank you. Does anyone need to leave, like, right now?
Madam Chair, this is Gordon. I hate to say it, but I do have folks waiting on me right
Okay.
now. Is there a way I could come back and do something with Elizabeth later, or?
Let's ask Elizabeth. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I know Elisa needed to leave right at noon too. She may have already left us, even though her name's still showing up there. She had another work obligation.
Okay.
I'll circle back with Elizabeth.
Okay. So I'm making a leap that the only one we're losing is Gordon, and then we'll turn it over to you, E.T. I'm sorry, E.T. I'm calling you E.T. because it says E.T. Turn it over to you, Elizabeth, so you can begin with Bob Eby.
I've already got my primary and secondary recording running, and so we are ready to begin. I'm sorry, was I on mute? I'm sorry. I've already got my primary and secondary recording running, so we are ready to begin.
Okay. So congratulations to the class of 2020. Yours will be a class that is forever remembered as being in the forefront of the time of change to a new normal. But don't be satisfied with just normal. Whatever that is, we don't know. Know that change brings opportunity, and use your educational accomplishments during this unique time and take this opportunity to make a positive difference in our changing world. Congratulations.
Mr. Edwards?
congratulations, class of 20. For you've accomplished great things, but you have a whole lifetime and more great things. I would encourage you to look not just at where you're heading right out of high school, whether it's military or job or additional education, but look at where you want to be 5, 10 years from now and beyond, and think through how to continue to stay on that track. Also want to encourage you to think about the time we're in, how important it is for leaders to be in our society, and you need to be a leader. We all need role models. We need you to be ours.
Thank you. Mr. Cobbins.
Yes, ma'am. Can you see me? Okay.
There you are.
All right. To the class of 2020, it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said that the ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand during times of comfort and convenience, but where they stand during times of challenge and controversy. And when we look at the world today, we can see that it needs your talent, it needs your skill, it needs your intellect, all of which you have garnered and prepared yourself with over the course of your education to this point. So consider the world your canvas, go out and paint a beautiful picture. And most importantly, know that your future is bright and that we're all here to support you and encourage you along the way. Congratulations.
Mr. Darnell.
So, over 4 years ago, I had the privilege and blessing to be able to teach a very small group of our class of 2020. And if the entire class is anything like that small group, they're going to be a phenomenal success. When I came in this morning, I had a quote laying on my desk, and I wanted to read that to the class of 2020. It's a quote by Steve Maraboli that says, "Never confuse someone else's inability to do something with its inability to be done." Class of 2020, there is a world full of problems and issues, and it is without a doubt that you could possibly be the ones who will solve those issues. Congratulations to you.
Mr. Jensen.
I'd like to encourage you to think about 3 things. To pursue your passion and dreams, to pursue a path of excellence in everything that you do, and find and engage a mentor who will walk with you in the next year to help you think about your life and what you do with it. Congratulations and God bless you.
Did we lose Ms. Kim, Elisa? I believe we did.
We did.
Okay. So I'm going to go next, Sarah, and I think you said you'll tape afterwards. Congratulations to the class of 2020. You have successfully completed high school, and now you're on to the next phase of your journey. Whether you go on to college or to career, my best advice for you as you move on is to do your absolute best wherever you go and in whatever you do. I want you to know that it's critically important to have confidence in yourself every step along the way. It's difficult to be successful in life if you doubt yourself, and I would highly suggest that you have a mentor or 2 along the way. One thing I know for sure is that if you do not believe in yourself, there is no way that you can reach all that you're meant to be. I was a very shy young girl growing up on the Mississippi coast, and I did not have that early confidence that I needed. But thanks to excellent mentors and a great education, I was able to gain success and confidence in life. I wish you all the best. Congratulations. Sarah, do you want to tape while we're here, or do you want to let everybody go? How would you like
No,
to?
that's fine. I'm ready to go now.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Do I need to do anything, Elizabeth, on the screen, or is this just going to automatically?
You're good to go.
Okay. Congratulations to the class of 2020. Graduating from high school is a huge accomplishment. You're on the precipice of an exciting new chapter now. You find yourself in a moment, like we all do, that's uncertain and strange, to be sure. But it's also a moment of real possibility. As Gandhi said, the future depends on what you do today. Don't wait for the opportunities to come to you. Take an active role now in shaping the kind of future you want for yourselves and for generations to follow. There is real possibility, as one of our members said, in times of change. And we look to you to grasp that possibility and make it your own. We believe in you and we're cheering you on. Congratulations again.
I think that concludes the taping. Before we adjourn, I want to just ask one more time if there are any comments from any of our board members. Well, thank you all for a great discussion today. As always, for your engagement. I do want to remind everyone that our next quarterly meeting is July the 24th. We do expect it to be in Nashville, and we will communicate. Sarah will certainly help us in knowing if it makes sense. And Nashville, of course, is still not 100% open, so we would have challenges if it would continue that way. But I do believe that they are well on the way to staging their reopening. So without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Have a great weekend.
Take care.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.